At 50 years old, Eleanor Brooks made a choice that scandalized an entire frontier town. She chose love over duty, passion over propriety, and her own happiness over everyone's expectations. When a cowboy nearly 10 years her junior kissed her under a winter moon, society said she was too old for romance, too respectable for desire. But Eleanor had already spent 30 years living for others. This is the story of a woman who refused to fade into the background, who discovered that the most dangerous thing you can do at 50 isn't falling in love. It's finally living the life you were meant to have. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far Eleanor's story travels. The train lurched to a grinding halt at Dry Creek Station, Wyoming territory, and Eleanor Brooks felt her stomach drop with it. Not from the motion, she'd endured far worse during 3 days of rattling across endless prairie, but from the sudden crushing weight of what she'd just done. 50 years old, widowed 6 months, everything she owned compressed into one leather suitcase and a trunk that hadn't yet arrived. She was insane. Through the smudged window, she could see the platform, if you could call 3 weathered planks and a leaning post a platform. Beyond it, Dry Creek sprawled like something apologetic, a collection of wooden buildings that looked one strong wind away from surrender. The sky pressed down, vast and merciless, making everything human seem temporary. "Ma'am, this is your stop." The conductor stood in the aisle, his expression caught between courtesy and concern. Eleanor realized she'd been sitting there, paralyzed, while other passengers had already disembarked. "Yes, of course. Thank you." She rose on legs that had gone stiff, smoothing her traveling dress, charcoal gray, respectable, the uniform of proper widowhood. The fabric whispered against her petticoats as she moved toward the door, each step feeling like a small act of rebellion against the voice in her head that sounded suspiciously like her daughter Margaret. "Mother, you can't be serious." "Wyoming? At your age?" The conductor helped her down the steps. The moment her boots touched Wyoming soil, wind hit her face with shocking intimacy, cold, sharp, carrying the scent of dust and distance and something wild she couldn't name. "Mrs. Brooks?" A man approached, lean and weathered, with a star pinned to his vest. The sheriff, she assumed. He touched his hat brim. "I'm Sheriff Garrett. Mrs. Pemberton sent word you'd be arriving today. She apologizes for not meeting you herself. Her youngest came down with croup this morning." "Oh, the poor dear. I hope it's not serious." "Doc says he'll pull through. Let me help you with that." He reached for her suitcase, and Eleanor surrendered it with a gratitude she tried not to show too obviously. Her arms ached. Everything ached. 3 days on hard benches, sleeping upright, eating what she could afford from station vendors. "The boarding house is just up Main Street," Sheriff Garrett continued, leading her toward the town. "Mrs. Patterson runs a respectable establishment. Clean rooms, good meals. You'll be comfortable there until the school provides something more permanent." If the school provides something more permanent, Eleanor thought, if they don't take one look at me and decide they made a terrible mistake. Main Street was a generous term for what amounted to a wide dirt road lined with false-fronted buildings. A general store, a saloon, 2, actually, a bank that looked more optimistic than the town probably warranted, a building marked Dry Creek Enterprise that she assumed was the newspaper. A few people moved along the wooden sidewalks, their faces turning to watch as she passed. She could feel their assessment like a physical thing. Too old, Easterner, won't last a month. Eleanor lifted her chin and kept walking. "Town's smaller than you're used to, I expect," Sheriff Garrett said, not unkindly. "But we're growing. Got nearly 300 souls now and more arriving every season. The railroad changed things. Used to be just ranchers and the occasional prospector passing through." "How many children attend the school?" "Right now? Maybe 30 when they all show up, which they don't most times. Harvest season, branding season, any season that needs extra hands. The older kids stay home to work. You'll have your hands full with the ones who do come." "Previous teacher," he paused delicately. "Well, let's just say discipline wasn't his strong suit." "I see." What she saw was a challenge even more daunting than she'd imagined. 30 children ranging from 6 to 16, she guessed, with sporadic attendance and no consistent education. Some probably couldn't read beyond basic words. Others might be sharp as tacks, but trapped by circumstance. The boarding house appeared ahead, a two-story structure that looked more solid than its neighbors, painted white with green shutters. A hand-lettered sign read, "Patterson's Boarding House, respectable lodging for respectable folk." Sheriff Garrett held the gate open. Mrs. Patterson's particular about her guests. No drinking, no carrying on, no gentlemen callers in the rooms. But she sets a fine table, and the beds have real mattresses, not just rope and straw. That sounds perfectly adequate. More than adequate. Eleanor had expected far worse. The small rebellion that had brought her west hadn't extended to fantasies of comfort. The front door opened before they reached it, and a woman emerged, 50-something, built like she'd weathered hard years without breaking, gray-threaded hair pulled into a ruthless bun. "Mrs. Brooks, I presume." "I'm Ida Patterson. You look half dead." "Sheriff, bring that case up to the second room on the right. Mrs. Brooks, you come inside and sit before you fall down." There was no arguing with a voice like that. Eleanor found herself ushered into a parlor that smelled of lye soap and furniture polish, deposited into a chair upholstered in faded burgundy velvet, and presented with a cup of coffee so strong it could have stripped paint. "Drink that. When did you last eat?" "Yesterday evening, I think, in Cheyenne." "Drink the coffee. I'll bring soup." Mrs. Patterson disappeared before Eleanor could protest. Sheriff Garrett set her suitcase by the stairs and touched his hat again. "I'll let you get settled. School board meetings tomorrow evening at 7 at the church. They'll want to meet you, go over expectations, that sort of thing. Mrs. Pemberton will likely stop by before then." "Thank you, Sheriff. You've been very kind." "Just doing my job, ma'am. Welcome to Dry Creek." He left, and Eleanor sat alone in the boarding house parlor, clutching a cup of coffee that burned her hands through the thin china, and finally, let herself feel the magnitude of what she'd done. She'd left New York. Left the brownstone where she'd lived for 28 years, where William had died in their bed with Eleanor holding his hand, where her children had been born and raised and had eventually left for lives of their own. Left her church, her charitable societies, her Tuesday afternoon reading circle. Left everything known and safe and expected. For this. A frontier town that looked like it might blow away. A teaching job that would pay a pittance. A future that held absolutely no guarantees. At 50 years old. "Mother, you're being irrational," Margaret had said, her voice tight with what she probably thought was loving concern. "You've just lost Father. You're not thinking clearly. Stay here. Stay where we can look after you." Translation: stay where we can manage you, where you won't be an embarrassment. "I don't need looking after," Eleanor had replied quietly. "I need to breathe." Mrs. Patterson returned with soup, beef and barley, thick enough to stand a spoon in, and a slice of bread that was still warm. "Eat. Then I'll show you to your room. You'll want to rest before supper. We eat at 6 sharp. Miss it, and you'll go hungry until breakfast." "Yes, ma'am." "Don't ma'am me. I'm Ida. You're Eleanor. We're both too old for nonsense." Eleanor felt something unknot in her chest, something she hadn't realized was wound tight until it loosened. "All right, Ida. That's better. Now eat that before it gets cold. And don't worry about the school board. They're desperate enough that they'd have hired a trained monkey if it could write its ABCs. You'll do fine." It wasn't exactly a ringing endorsement, but Eleanor found herself smiling anyway. Basit. The room was small, just a bed, a washstand, a bureau, and a chair by the window, but it was clean and warm and entirely hers. Eleanor unpacked her single suitcase, hanging her 2 dresses in the narrow wardrobe, arranging her few personal items on the bureau. A silver-framed photograph of William, her mother's ivory comb, the slim volume of Whitman poems that William had given her on their first anniversary, back when they were still young and still believed they knew what love meant. She sat on the bed and felt exhaustion pull at her like a riptide. But she didn't sleep, not yet. Instead, she moved to the window and looked out at Dry Creek as afternoon shadows stretched long across the dusty street. A wagon rattled past, loaded with lumber. 2 men stood outside the saloon, smoking and talking. A woman in a faded calico dress herded 3 small children toward the general store. Ordinary life. Frontier life. Nothing like the world she'd left behind. Eleanor pressed her palm against the glass, feeling the cold seep through. What am I doing here? But she knew, even if she couldn't articulate it to her children or to the friends who'd looked at her with such carefully masked pity when she'd announced her decision, she knew. She was here because when William died, something in her had woken up. Some part she'd buried for 3 decades under the weight of being a good wife, a devoted mother, a respectable woman of a certain class. William had been a good man, not passionate, not exciting, but decent and steady. Their marriage had been what marriages were supposed to be, companionable, functional, appropriate. She had loved him. Of course she had. But she had never been alive with him. And then, at his funeral, as she'd stood beside his grave in her widow's blacks with her children flanking her like sentries, and the minister droning on about eternal rest, she'd felt something crack open inside her chest. Is this all there is? 50 years old. Half of them spent managing a household, raising children, attending the right parties, saying the right things, being the right kind of woman. And now, what? 20 more years, maybe 30 if she was unlucky, of slowly fading into that particular kind of invisibility reserved for older women, becoming someone's burden, someone's concern, someone's poor mother. No. The newspaper advertisement had been in the stack of mail her son Robert had brought to the house, tucked between condolence letters and bills. Teacher wanted, Dry Creek, Wyoming Territory, room and board provided, inquire by wire. Eleanor had stared at it for 3 days. Then she'd sent the wire. Supper at Patterson's boarding house was served family-style at a long table in the dining room. Eleanor came down promptly at 6 to find 5 other boarders already seated, 2 young men who worked for the railroad, a married couple who ran the dry goods store, and a woman about Eleanor's age who introduced herself as Miss Alice Thornton, the postmistress. "You'll forgive the curiosity," Miss Thornton said as dishes were passed, "but we don't often get newcomers, especially not women traveling alone. What brings you to our little corner of nowhere?" Eleanor helped herself to mashed potatoes, buying time. How to answer that? I was suffocating in my own life and needed to escape before I disappeared entirely? "I accepted the teaching position," she said simply. "I taught before I married, years ago. When I saw the advertisement, it seemed like an opportunity." An opportunity? One of the railroad men, Jenkins, she thought his name was, grinned. "That's one way to put it. Most folks would call it crazy, leaving civilization for this." "Samuel," his companion warned. "What?" "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking." "I don't mind honesty," Eleanor said mildly. "And you're right. It is rather unconventional. But I've spent enough time being conventional. I thought I'd try something different." That earned her an approving nod from Miss Thornton and a thoughtful look from Ida Patterson. "You'll find Dry Creek is good at different," the dry goods woman, Mrs. Chen, said. Her accent carried the rounded vowels of somewhere in the South. "My husband and I came here from San Francisco 5 years ago. Folks said we were mad. Maybe we were, but we're still here." "What made you stay?" Eleanor asked. Mrs. Chen and her husband exchanged a look. "Same thing that makes most people stay, I suppose," Mr. Chen answered. "We got tired of being told who we ought to be." Eleanor understood that. She understood it perfectly. The conversation moved on to safer topics: the upcoming harvest, the new well being dug at the edge of town, speculation about whether the railroad would extend the line further west. Eleanor listened more than she spoke, gathering information, trying to learn the rhythms of this place that would be her home. After supper, she helped clear the table despite Ida's protests, then excused herself to her room. Tomorrow would be the school board meeting. Tomorrow she would have to prove she was worth the risk they'd taken in hiring a 50-year-old widow, sight unseen. Tonight, she just needed to sleep. But sleep didn't come easily. The bed was comfortable enough, but the sounds were all wrong. No city noises, no carriages rattling past, no familiar creaks of her old house settling. Instead, wind against the windows, the distant yip of coyotes, footsteps on the floor above, the low murmur of voices from somewhere below. Frontier sounds. Strange sounds. Eleanor lay in the darkness and wondered if she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Eleanor woke early, dressed in her best day dress, navy blue with modest trim, and came down to breakfast feeling like she was preparing for battle. "School board won't eat you," Ida said, setting a plate of eggs and bacon in front of her. "Probably." "That's remarkably reassuring. I do what I can. Eat up. Mrs. Pemberton said she'd come by around 9 to walk you over to the schoolhouse. You'll want to see it before the meeting tonight." Eleanor's stomach clenched, but she forced herself to eat. The food was good, far better than she'd expected. Ida Patterson might be gruff, but she could cook. Mrs. Pemberton arrived precisely at 9, a sturdy woman in her 30s with kind eyes and calloused hands. She had 3 children with her, the youngest, a boy of about 4, who she said was recovering from croup, and 2 girls who stared at Eleanor with unabashed curiosity. "I'm so sorry I couldn't meet you yesterday," Mrs. Pemberton said as they walked toward the schoolhouse. "When Samuel gets sick, nothing else matters." "Please don't apologize. I hope he's feeling better." "Much. The fever broke last night." She glanced at Eleanor. "I'll be honest, Mrs. Brooks. When the board decided to advertise back east, I wasn't sure we'd get any responses. Teaching out here isn't easy. The pay is poor, the conditions are rough, and the children, well, they're good children, but they're not the refined young people you're probably used to." "I taught in a factory district school before I married," Eleanor said quietly. "I'm not unfamiliar with challenging conditions." "That was 30 years ago." "Yes, it was." They looked at each other, 2 women who understood what wasn't being said. Mrs. Pemberton nodded slowly. "Fair enough. Here we are." The schoolhouse was a single-room building set back from the main street, with peeling white paint and a bell tower that listed slightly to one side. The steps leading up to the door sagged in the middle. Mrs. Pemberton produced a key and unlocked the door. Inside, Eleanor's heart sank. 30 desks, rough benches really, arranged in uneven rows. A pot-bellied stove in the center, unlit. A teacher's desk at the front that had seen better days. Walls bare except for a faded map of the United States that still showed territories that had since become states. The floor was dirty, the windows were filthy. Cobwebs draped the corners like forgotten mourning crepe. "The previous teacher left rather abruptly," Mrs. Pemberton said, her tone apologetic. "There wasn't time to clean properly." Eleanor walked slowly through the room, her boots echoing on the wooden floor. She ran a finger along one desk, and it came away gray with dust. The blackboard at the front was so covered in old chalk marks that she could barely make out the wood beneath. This was where she would work. This was her classroom. She turned to face Mrs. Pemberton, who was watching her with an expression that suggested she was braced for disappointment. "Do you have cleaning supplies?" Eleanor asked. Yes, at the general store, but you don't need to." "I'll need buckets, soap, rags. And if there's someone who can look at that stove before winter truly sets in, that would be wise. Also, the steps outside are unsafe. They should be repaired before a child falls through." Mrs. Pemberton's expression shifted from apprehension to something like relief. "I'll speak to the board about the repairs. As for the cleaning supplies, I can have them sent over this afternoon." "Thank you. I'll start tomorrow morning." "You're going to clean it yourself?" Eleanor looked around the neglected room again. "It's my classroom. I should make it ready." That evening, Eleanor presented herself at the church for the school board meeting with her spine straight and her hands folded calmly in her lap, even though her heart was hammering against her ribs. The board consisted of 5 members: Mrs. Pemberton, Sheriff Garrett, Reverend Walsh, an elderly man with magnificent white whiskers, Mr. Jameson, who owned the bank, and a rancher named Harding, whose weathered face suggested he'd spent more time in the saddle than in committee meetings. They sat in a semicircle in the church basement, and Eleanor sat facing them like a defendant before a jury. Reverend Walsh cleared his throat. "Mrs. Brooks, we appreciate you making the journey all the way from New York. As you can imagine, we were quite pleased to receive your response to our advertisement. Teachers willing to work in the territories are few and far between." "I'm grateful for the opportunity, Reverend." "Yes. Well," he glanced at his fellow board members. "We have a few questions, if you don't mind." "Of course." Mr. Jameson leaned forward. "Your letter said you taught before your marriage. That was some time ago, was it not? 30 years ago, yes, but I've kept current with educational methods, and I've tutored my own children and those of friends throughout the intervening years. Tutoring is rather different from managing a classroom of frontier children, Jameson said. His tone wasn't unkind, but it was skeptical. These aren't city children. They're rough. Many of them work harder than grown men. They don't take kindly to being told what to do by someone they don't respect. Eleanor met his gaze steadily. Respect isn't given freely, Mr. Jameson. It's earned. I understand that. I'm prepared to earn it. The previous teacher couldn't maintain discipline, Sheriff Garrett said. The older boys ran wild. Several parents pulled their children out rather than subject them to the chaos. What happened to him? He left in the middle of the night 3 months ago. Didn't even collect his final wages. Eleanor absorbed that. May I ask why you didn't hire locally? Mrs. Pemberton answered. We tried. No one wanted the position. It pays $40 a month and provides no housing beyond what you arrange yourself. Most young men can make more working ranches or the railroad, and most women... She trailed off delicately. Most women marry, Eleanor finished. Yes, I understand. Forgive me for being blunt, Mrs. Brooks, Harding said, speaking for the first time. His voice was a rumble, rough from years of shouting over cattle and wind. But you're not a young woman. This job will require long hours, physical stamina, and dealing with children who'll test you at every turn. Are you certain you're up to it? A month ago, Eleanor might have faltered at that question, a week ago even. But now, sitting in this basement church in a town at the edge of nowhere, having traveled 3 days alone to get here, having walked away from everything safe and familiar, she felt something solid settle in her chest. Mr. Harding, I raised 4 children through scarlet fever, financial panic, and a war that nearly destroyed this country. I've managed households, organized fundraisers, and dealt with situations that would make most men blanch. I'm 50 years old, not dead, and I'm tired of people treating age like it's a disease rather than an accumulation of experience. She paused, then added more softly, I can't promise I'll never make mistakes. I can't promise the children will love me or that parents will approve of my methods. But I can promise that I will show up every single day and do my absolute best. That's all anyone can offer. Silence fell over the basement. Then Harding started laughing, a deep, genuine sound that seemed to startle the other board members. Well, I'll be damned. You've got sand, Mrs. Brooks. I like that. He looked at his colleagues. I say we give her the job. Anyone object? Mrs. Pemberton was smiling. No objection from me. Sheriff Garrett shook his head. She's already signed the contract. I say we let her prove herself. Reverend Walsh nodded. Agreed. Mrs. Brooks, welcome to Dry Creek. We hope you'll find satisfaction in the work. Mr. Jameson was the last to respond. He studied Eleanor for a long moment, then sighed. Very well, but I'll be frank. The board meets monthly to review the teacher's progress. If things aren't working out, I understand, Mr. Jameson. I wouldn't expect otherwise. As Eleanor walked back to the boarding house through the dark streets, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Pride. Not the quiet, dutiful pride of a job well done according to someone else's standards, but the fierce, uncomplicated pride of having fought for something and won. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. Now all she had to do was not fail spectacularly. Eleanor spent the next 3 days transforming the schoolhouse from a disaster into something approaching functional. Ida helped, bringing buckets and brushes and a work ethic that brooked no nonsense. Miss Thornton stopped by with wildflowers for the teacher's desk. Mrs. Chen donated fabric for new curtains. Word spread through town that the new teacher was scrubbing her own schoolhouse, and slowly, people started appearing to help. A rancher's wife brought her teenage sons to haul out broken furniture. The blacksmith repaired the sagging steps. Someone, Eleanor never learned who, left a new box of chalk on the doorstep. By the time Sunday arrived, the schoolhouse gleamed. The floors were clean, the windows sparkled, the desks stood in neat rows. Eleanor had even managed to acquire a few books from families willing to donate volumes their children had outgrown. She stood at the front of the room that evening, surveying her work, and felt a fierce satisfaction. Not bad for a city lady. Eleanor jumped, spinning toward the door. A man stood in the entrance, backlit by the setting sun, so she couldn't make out his features clearly. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in work clothes and a wide-brimmed hat. "I'm sorry," Eleanor said, her heart still racing from the startle. "I didn't hear you approach." "Didn't mean to scare you." He stepped inside, and she could see him better now. Somewhere in his early 40s, she guessed, with dark hair going gray at the temples and eyes that studied her with open curiosity. "I'm Caleb Turner. I've got a ranch about 5 miles west of here. Mrs. Pemberton mentioned you might need help with the shutters before the next storm rolls through." "The shutters?" He gestured toward the windows. "They're loose. Won't hold in a real wind. Thought I'd secure them before school starts tomorrow, and you've got children to worry about." "That's very kind of you, Mr. Turner. I'm afraid I hadn't even noticed." Most folks don't notice shutters until they're banging at 3 in the morning." He smiled, a slow, easy expression that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "You've done good work here. Place looks 100 times better than it did last week." "You saw it before?" "Rode past a few times. Always meant to volunteer to help clean it, but—" He shrugged. "Ranch doesn't run itself, and I figured the previous teacher had things under control. Guess I was wrong about that." Eleanor found herself studying him with the same curiosity he'd shown her. There was something steady about Caleb Turner, something solid in the way he stood and spoke. He didn't seem put off by her age or her status as a widow. He just treated her like a person. "Well, I appreciate you taking the time now," she said, "though I'm afraid I can't pay you for the work." "Didn't ask for payment. I've got a niece who'll be in your classroom come tomorrow. Figure helping you is helping her." He touched his hat. "I'll just get started if that's all right with you." "Of course." "Thank you, Mr. Turner." Eleanor tried to return to the lesson plans she'd been preparing, but she found herself distracted by the sounds of him working outside. The measured tap of a hammer, the creak of wood, the occasional grunt of effort. There was something comforting about it, about knowing someone was taking care of something she hadn't even realized needed attention. When he finished, he appeared in the doorway again. "Should hold now. But if you notice any problems, send word to the Triple T Ranch. Someone will come out." "The Triple T?" "Turner's Triple T. My brother and I run it together. Well, ran it. He passed 2 years ago. Now it's just me and the hands." He said it matter-of-factly, without looking for sympathy. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Appreciate that. He was a good man. Best brother anyone could ask for." Caleb looked around the schoolhouse once more. "You've got grit, ma'am. This town could use that." It was such a simple statement, but something about it caught in Eleanor's chest. Not "you're brave" or "you're impressive" or any of the faintly condescending things people had been saying to her since she'd announced her plan to move west. Just "you've got grit," an acknowledgement, plain and simple. "Thank you, Mr. Turner." "Caleb, we're not much for formality out here." "Caleb, then." "I'm Eleanor." He smiled again. "Nice to meet you, Eleanor. I expect I'll see you around. My niece, her name's Sarah. She's 12 and sharp as a tack, but she's quiet. Sometimes gets overlooked because she doesn't make trouble. Just wanted you to know to look out for her." "I will. I promise." He nodded and left, and Eleanor stood in her clean schoolhouse, listening to his footsteps fade and feeling strangely unsettled. When she returned to the boarding house, Ida took one look at her face and said, "Met Caleb Turner, did you?" "He fixed the shutters." "I know. I suggested he stop by." Ida set a plate of cold chicken on the table. "Good man, Caleb. Steady, honest. Lost his wife in childbirth 10 years ago. Baby didn't make it either. Nearly broke him, but he came through it." Eleanor sat down slowly. "That's terrible." "It was, but he's made a life since, takes care of his niece like she's his own daughter, runs one of the most successful ranches in the territory, doesn't drink to excess, doesn't gamble, doesn't chase women." Ida paused meaningfully. "Lot of widows in town have tried. He's not interested." I didn't. I'm just saying, in case you were wondering." Eleanor felt her cheeks warm. "I wasn't wondering anything of the sort." "Course not," Ida said cheerfully. "Eat your chicken. Let's out." Monday morning arrived with terrifying speed. Eleanor woke while it was still dark, her stomach in knots, and dressed with shaking hands. She chose her most severe day dress, dark gray with a high collar, and pinned her hair into the tightest bun she could manage. Armor. All of it, armor. By the time she walked to the schoolhouse, the sun was just beginning to edge above the horizon, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. The street was quiet. Most of town was still sleeping. Eleanor unlocked the schoolhouse door and stepped inside. Her classroom. Her responsibility. Her chance. She lit the stove, set out the lesson plan she'd prepared, wrote the day's schedule on the freshly cleaned blackboard. Then she stood at the front of the room and waited. The first student arrived at 8:30, a small girl of about 7 with blonde braids and enormous blue eyes. She stood in the doorway, clutching a slate, and stared at Eleanor. "Good morning," Eleanor said gently. "I'm Mrs. Brooks. What's your name?" "Emma. Emma Sullivan." "It's lovely to meet you, Emma. Choose any desk you'd like." Emma scurried to a seat in the front row and sat with her hands folded, still staring. Other children trickled in over the next 20 minutes. Some came in groups, siblings, Eleanor guessed. Others arrived alone, wary and watchful. A few greeted her politely. Most just found seats and waited. By 9 o'clock, she had 23 children ranging from perhaps 6 to 16. The older boys sat in the back, radiating skepticism. The younger children huddled near the front, and there, in the middle, sat a girl with dark hair and intelligent eyes who had to be Sarah Turner. Eleanor rang the bell to signal the start of class. 23 faces turned toward her, some curious, some bored, some openly challenging. This was it. No going back now. "Good morning," Eleanor said, her voice carrying clearly through the room. "My name is Mrs. Eleanor Brooks, and I'm delighted to be your teacher this year. I know you're wondering about me, where I came from, why I'm here, whether I'll be any good. Those are fair questions. So let me tell you a bit about myself, and then we'll talk about what we're going to accomplish together." She saw a few faces shift from skeptical to interested. "I'm from New York City. I'm 50 years old. I'm a widow. I taught school before I married, and now I'm teaching again because I missed it. I don't know everything about life out here yet. I've only been in Dry Creek for 4 days, but I'm learning. What I do know is reading, writing, mathematics, history, geography, and how to help young people discover what they're capable of." One of the older boys in the back, tall, probably 15, with the build of someone who'd been working ranch jobs for years, raised his hand. "Yes?" Eleanor said. "Johnny Mason, ma'am. I got a question." "Go ahead, Johnny." "Previous teacher couldn't keep order. He couldn't teach us nothing because he couldn't get us to listen. What makes you think you'll be any different?" Absolute silence fell. The other students watched to see how she'd respond. Eleanor looked at Johnny Mason, really looked, not with anger but with attention, and saw a young man who'd probably been talked down to by adults his entire life, who'd learned that authority figures made promises they didn't keep. "That's a good question," she said quietly, "and I'll be honest, I don't know if I'll be different, but I'd like to try something. I'd like to make an agreement with all of you." She moved from behind the teacher's desk and stood where they could all see her clearly. "I will treat you with respect. I won't assume you're ignorant because you live in Wyoming instead of New York. I won't assume you're incapable because some of you work ranches and miss school sometimes. I won't talk down to you or waste your time. In return, I ask that you give me the same respect. Listen when I'm teaching. Do the work I assign. Ask questions when you don't understand. And if something isn't working, if I'm teaching something that makes no sense for your lives, tell me and we'll figure out something better." She paused, then added, "I'm here because I chose to be. Nobody forced me to come to Dry Creek. I came because I believe education matters, and because I think you deserve a teacher who shows up and tries. So that's what I'm going to do. Will you give me a chance?" Another long silence. Then Sarah Turner raised her hand. When Eleanor nodded at her, she said quietly, "I'll give you a chance, Mrs. Brooks." One by one, other hands went up. Even Johnny Mason, after a moment, nodded. Eleanor felt something tight in her chest loosen. "Thank you," she said. "Now, let's begin." The first week was brutal. Eleanor went to bed each night exhausted, her voice hoarse from talking, her hands cramped from writing on the blackboard. her head spinning with names and faces and the complex dynamics of frontier childhood. But she loved it. She loved the moment when little Emma Sullivan sounded out a word she'd never read before, and her face lit up with triumph. She loved the way the older boys grudgingly started participating in discussions when they realized she actually wanted to hear their opinions. She loved watching Sarah Turner blossom under attention, her quiet intelligence emerging day by day. It wasn't easy. Some children were years behind where they should be. Others were so far ahead they were bored. Attendance fluctuated wildly based on weather and ranch needs. She had to break up 2 fistfights, mediate a dozen smaller conflicts, and figure out how to teach mathematics to students who could barely add while simultaneously challenging the ones who could calculate feed ratios in their sleep. But for the first time in 30 years, Eleanor woke up excited for the day ahead. On Friday afternoon, as the children filed out, Johnny Mason stopped at her desk. "Ma'am, I just wanted to say, you're all right for a city teacher." Coming from him, it was high praise. "Thank you, Johnny. You're all right yourself, for a student who was determined to hate me." He grinned, sudden and transforming. "Yeah, well, you earned it." After he left, Eleanor sat alone in the quiet schoolhouse, watching dust motes drift through afternoon sunlight, and felt something she hadn't felt in longer than she could remember. Peace. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. But late October brought the first serious storm, a howling monster that rattled windows and turned the streets to mud. Eleanor huddled in her room at the boarding house, listening to wind shriek around corners, and worried about her students. Were they safe? Were their homes secure? The storm blew itself out overnight, and morning dawned clear and cold. Eleanor dressed and headed to the schoolhouse early, wanting to make sure everything was secure before the children arrived. She found Caleb Turner on the roof, replacing shingles that had blown off. "You're up early," she called. He looked down, hammer in hand. "Storm damage. Figured I'd fix it before you got here and worried." "That's very thoughtful, but you don't need to keep rescuing my schoolhouse." "Not rescuing, just maintaining. Big difference." He finished hammering the shingle into place and climbed down the ladder with the ease of someone who'd spent his life working with his hands. "How'd you fare in the storm?" "Fine. Ida's boarding house is solid. How are things at your ranch?" "Lost part of a fence line, but nothing serious. Sarah wanted me to check on the schoolhouse. She was worried about it." Eleanor smiled. "She's a sweet girl. She's doing wonderful work in class." "She's smart. Takes after her mother that way." He gathered his tools. "I'm heading into town for supplies. Can I walk with you?" "I'd like that." They fell into step together, navigating the muddy streets. Caleb moved with an easy confidence that Eleanor envied, completely at home in this wild place. She still felt like a visitor, even after 6 weeks. "You settling in all right?" he asked. "Town isn't too rough for you?" "It's different from what I'm used to, but I like it. There's a directness here. People say what they mean." "That's frontier living. Not much point in being fancy when you're working cattle or trying to survive winter." "Is it very hard? The winters?" "Can be. This'll be your first. You'll want to lay in supplies come November. Stock up on food, firewood, anything you'll need. Storms can trap you inside for days." Eleanor felt a small flutter of anxiety. She'd never had to think about such things before. In New York, grocers delivered. Coal was hauled by the ton. She'd been insulated from the practical realities of survival. "I see I have a lot to learn," she said quietly. "You'll figure it out. You figured out everything else." He glanced at her. "Sarah says you're the best teacher she's ever had." "She's only had one other teacher, and he ran away in the night." "True, but she means it. She comes home excited about school, asks questions about what you taught." "That's new." Eleanor felt warmth spread through her chest. She makes teaching a joy. All of them do, actually, even the difficult ones. Even Johnny Mason? Especially Johnny Mason. He's brilliant when he wants to be. He just needed someone to notice. They reached the schoolhouse. Caleb set down his tool bag and looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You're good for this town, Eleanor. I'm glad you came." It was the first time he'd used her given name since that initial meeting. Something about hearing it in his low, steady voice made her intensely aware of him, of the breadth of his shoulders, the calluses on his hands, the way he looked at her like she was worth looking at. She was 50 years old, a widow, a schoolteacher in a frontier town. She should not be feeling whatever this was. "Thank you," she managed. "That means a great deal." He smiled, that slow, warm smile that seemed to light him from within, and touched his hat. "Better let you get to work. Students will be arriving soon." Eleanor watched him walk away, his long strides eating up the muddy street, and tried to ignore the way her heart was beating just a little too fast. "Don't be ridiculous," she told herself firmly. "He's just being kind." But as she turned to unlock the schoolhouse door, she found herself smiling for no reason at all. November arrived with a vengeance, bringing cold that cut through Eleanor's wool coat like it was made of paper. She learned quickly that frontier cold was different from city cold, sharper, meaner, personal in its assault. Her hands chapped within days. Her face burned despite the scarf Ida insisted she wear. But the children still came to school, bundled in layers of mismatched clothing, their cheeks bright red from the walk. Eleanor kept the stove burning hot enough that the classroom felt like summer, and she let the younger ones sit close to it during lessons. "Mrs. Brooks?" Emma Sullivan raised her hand one morning, her voice small. "My ma says there's a harvest supper at the church on Saturday. Will you come?" Eleanor looked up from the mathematics problems she was writing on the board. The entire class had gone quiet, watching her with that particular intensity children reserved for moments that mattered to them. "I'd be delighted to come," she said. "Thank you for inviting me, Emma." The little girl beamed. Several other children nodded approvingly. Even Johnny Mason looked satisfied. That Saturday evening, Eleanor walked to the church with Ida, who'd insisted she needed proper introduction to what she called real frontier socializing. "It's not like your fancy New York parties," Ida warned as they navigated the frozen mud of Main Street. "Nobody's going to be discussing literature or politics. Mostly people eat too much, gossip a little, and try not to freeze on the walk home." "Sounds perfect to me." The church basement was packed with what seemed like half the territory. Long tables groaned under the weight of food, roasted meats, vegetables from root cellars, pies and cakes and breads. The air was thick with conversation and the smell of cooking and wood smoke from the stove in the corner. Eleanor was immediately engulfed by parents wanting to talk about their children. Mrs. Sullivan thanked her tearfully for teaching Emma to read. Mr. Mason, Johnny's father, shook her hand and said his boy had never taken to school before, but something had changed. Mrs. Chen introduced her to a dozen other families, rattling off names faster than Eleanor could possibly remember. It was overwhelming. It was wonderful. "You're the hit of the party," a familiar voice said near her elbow. Eleanor turned to find Caleb Turner standing there with a plate of food, looking amused. He'd cleaned up for the occasion. Fresh shirt, hair combed back, beard trimmed. She realized with a small shock that he was actually quite handsome when he wasn't covered in dust and sweat from ranch work. "I think they're just being kind," she said. "They're being honest. Half these parents were ready to give up on the school entirely. You changed their minds." He gestured toward an empty spot at one of the tables. "Want to sit before all the good food disappears?" They settled at the end of a long table, and Eleanor found herself relaxing in his quiet company. Caleb didn't demand conversation the way some people did. He was comfortable with silence, content to eat and observe and occasionally offer a dry comment that made her laugh. "Sarah's mother would have liked you," he said at one point, watching his niece across the room talking animatedly with other children. She believed in education, wanted Sarah to have opportunities she never had. How old was Sarah when her mother passed? 2. Barely old enough to remember her. His expression went distant. "My brother took it hard, threw himself into ranch work, trying to outrun the grief. Worked himself into an early grave, if I'm being honest. Left me Sarah and a ranch to run and no damn idea how to do either properly." Eleanor heard the pain beneath the matter-of-fact words. "You've done a beautiful job with Sarah. She's not just smart, she's kind. That doesn't happen by accident." "I tried, still trying." He set down his fork. "Raising a girl when you're a rough-edged bachelor rancher isn't exactly natural. I make mistakes every day." "We all do. I made plenty with my own children, and I supposedly knew what I was doing. But they turned out all right?" Eleanor thought about Margaret and Robert and the others, successful, respectable, living lives they'd chosen or been guided into. They turned out fine, though I'm not sure they'd say the same about me right now. Because you came here? Because I chose myself over their comfort. She surprised herself with the honesty. They wanted me to stay in New York, to be a convenient grandmother, to fade quietly into old age. I refused. I don't think they've forgiven me for it. Caleb studied her with those steady eyes. Good. Good? Good that you chose yourself. Too many people don't. They spend their whole lives being what everyone else needs and wake up at 60 having never lived at all. He paused. My wife, Catherine, she was like that. Always putting everyone first. Died trying to give me a child because she thought that's what I needed, even though I told her we'd be fine with just the two of us. Sometimes choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's survival. The rawness in his voice made Eleanor's throat tight. She reached across the table without thinking and briefly touched his hand. I'm sorry. Ancient history now. 10 years changes everything. But his hand turned under hers, just for a moment, returning the pressure before they both pulled away. The moment hung between them, charged with something Eleanor didn't want to name. Across the room, Ida caught her eye and raised one knowing eyebrow. Eleanor pretended not to notice. The supper wound down as the evening grew late and the temperature dropped. Families bundled up children and headed home through the bitter cold. Eleanor helped the church ladies clean up, washing dishes in water so hot it turned her hands red, and tried not to notice that Caleb seemed to be doing the same thing, finding excuses to linger. Finally, Ida appeared at her elbow. I'm heading back. You coming, or are you planning to sleep in a pew? I'm coming. Outside, the cold hit like a physical blow. Eleanor gasped, and Caleb immediately stepped closer, blocking the worst of the wind with his body. Let me walk you back, he said. It's not safe in this cold. People freeze to death walking distances they think they know. Ida shot Eleanor a look that clearly said, I'll leave you two alone, and announced she was stopping at the Chen store to pick up something she'd forgotten. Eleanor didn't believe her for a second, but suddenly she and Caleb were walking through the frozen night together, their breath pluming white in the darkness. The sky above was crystalline with stars, more stars than Eleanor had ever imagined existed. The Milky Way sprawled across the heavens like someone had spilled diamonds. It's breathtaking, she whispered. Gets me every time, no matter how many years I've lived here. Caleb walked close enough that their shoulders occasionally brushed. City folk don't know what they're missing, all that light blocking out the sky. We don't know what we're missing about a lot of things. They walked in silence for a while, the frozen ground crunching beneath their boots. Eleanor's face hurt from the cold despite her scarf. Her fingers were going numb even inside her gloves. Eleanor, Caleb said quietly. Can I ask you something? Of course. Are you happy here? Really happy? Or are you just making the best of a situation you can't get out of? She stopped walking, surprised by the question. He stopped too, turning to face her. In the starlight, his features were all shadows and plains. I'm happy, she said, and realized it was completely true. Happier than I've been in years, maybe ever, even in this God-forsaken cold. Even then, she smiled, though I reserve the right to complain about the weather. Fair enough. He smiled back, and something in his expression made her pulse quicken. I'm glad. You fit here, like you were always meant to be here, and just took a while finding your way. Before Eleanor could respond, before she could examine too closely why those words affected her so deeply, they heard shouting from down the street. Caleb's entire body went tense. Stay here. What's happening? I don't know, but stay back. He strode toward the commotion, and Eleanor followed, despite his instruction, because she wasn't about to stand alone in the freezing dark while something potentially dangerous happened. They found a cluster of people outside the saloon, men mostly, with Sheriff Garrett trying to calm someone who was swaying drunk and shouting incoherently. Eleanor recognized him after a moment. Tom Rawlings, whose daughter Mary attended school irregularly and always came in with bruises she claimed came from falling. You got no right, Rawlings was bellowing. No right to tell me how to raise my own child. Nobody's telling you anything, Tom, the sheriff said, his voice calm but firm. Just suggesting you go home and sleep it off. That bitch schoolteacher's been filling Mary's head with ideas. making her think she's too good for honest work. Eleanor's blood went cold. Caleb moved in front of her, blocking her from Rawlings' line of sight. "Careful, Tom," Caleb said quietly, dangerously quiet. Rawlings squinted at him. "Turner. Should have known you'd defend her. Everyone knows you've been sniffing around." He didn't get to finish. Caleb moved faster than Eleanor would have thought possible, getting right in Rawlings' face. "Finish that sentence and you'll regret it. Mrs. Brooks is a respectable woman doing her job. Your daughter's smart and deserves better than what you're giving her. Now apologize." "I don't have to apologize, or I'll make you apologize." The threat hung in the frozen air. Rawlings looked around, saw that no one was coming to his defense, and mumbled something that might have been an apology before stumbling off into the night. Sheriff Garrett sighed. "Thanks, Caleb. He's been getting worse lately. I'm keeping an eye on it." "You do that, and check on Mary. Those bruises she's got aren't from falling." The sheriff's expression hardened. "I will." The crowd dispersed, people heading home, the excitement over. Caleb turned back to Eleanor, who was shaking, not from cold, but from fury and fear and something else she couldn't name. "Are you all right?" he asked. "That man, he hits his daughter." "I know. A lot of people know. But there's not much the sheriff can do without proof, and Mary won't talk." "She's 12 years old. Someone should protect her." "Someone should. But this is the frontier, Eleanor. Law only goes so far. Families handle their own business, even when that business is ugly." Eleanor thought of Mary Rawlings, a quiet girl who sat in the back and never raised her hand, who flinched when people moved too quickly near her, who wore her shame like a second skin. "I can't just do nothing." Caleb touched her shoulder gently. "I'm not saying do nothing. I'm saying be careful. Tom Rawlings is a mean drunk, and he's got friends who are worse. Don't make yourself a target. He already called me a bitch in front of half the town. He was drunk. He'll barely remember it tomorrow." Caleb's hand was still on her shoulder, warm through her coat. "But I'll remember. And if he comes near you or says another word against you, I'll make sure he regrets it." The protective edge in his voice did something complicated to Eleanor's insides. She stepped back, suddenly very aware of how close they were standing, how his hand had felt on her shoulder, how easy it would be to lean into his warmth. "I should get back," she said. "Ida will worry." "Right. Yes." He seemed to shake himself. "Come on. I'll see you safe." They walked the rest of the way in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before, charged with everything they weren't saying. At the boarding house steps, Eleanor turned to thank him and found him looking at her with an expression that made her breath catch. "Eleanor," he started, then stopped. "Never mind. Good night. Stay warm." "Good night, Caleb." She watched him walk away into the darkness, his tall form eventually swallowed by shadows and cold, and wondered what he'd been about to say. Inside, Ida was waiting in the parlor with tea and a knowing expression. "Don't start," Eleanor warned. "I didn't say a word." "You're thinking very loudly." Ida laughed. "He's a good man, Eleanor, one of the best, and he looks at you like you hung the moon." "He looks at me like a friend, that's all." "Keep telling yourself that." Ida poured tea into 2 cups. "But for what it's worth, I think you'd be good for each other. You're both too young to be alone for the rest of your lives." "I'm 50 years old. That's hardly young. You've got 20, 30 years left, maybe more. You planning to spend all of them teaching other people's children and going home to an empty room?" Eleanor wrapped her hands around the warm cup and stared into the dark liquid. "I don't know what I'm planning. I came here to teach, to start over, not to what? Feel something? Want something?" Ida leaned forward. "Eleanor, I watched you with him tonight. I've seen you these past weeks when he stops by the schoolhouse or you run into him in town. You light up. You're allowed to light up." "It's inappropriate. I'm a widow, a school teacher. I have a reputation to maintain." "This is Wyoming, not New York. Out here, people judge you by whether you're strong enough to survive, not whether you follow some arbitrary social rules." Ida's voice softened. "You ran away from one prison. Don't build yourself another one." Eleanor thought about that long after she'd gone to bed, lying in the darkness and listening to the wind howl around the boarding house. She thought about Caleb's hand on her shoulder, the protective fury in his voice when Rawlings had insulted her, the way he'd almost said something at her doorstep and then pulled back. She thought about Margaret's voice on the day she'd announced she was leaving. "Mother, you're being irrational. You're not thinking clearly." Maybe she wasn't thinking clearly. Maybe that was exactly the point. The next week brought the first real snow. Not the light dustings they'd had before, but thick, heavy flakes that fell from a sky the color of iron and covered everything in white silence. Eleanor stood at the schoolhouse window during afternoon recess, watching her students pelt each other with snowballs and shriek with laughter, and felt a contentment so profound it almost hurt. "Mrs. Brooks?" Sarah Turner appeared at her elbow, her dark hair dusted with snow. "May I ask you something?" "Of course, Sarah." "Do you miss your family, your children?" Eleanor considered the question carefully. Sarah deserved honesty. "Yes and no. I miss who they were when they were young, the way your age are now, full of questions and wonder. But the adults they became, we don't understand each other very well anymore." "Why not?" "Because they want me to be someone I'm not, and I got tired of pretending." Sarah nodded slowly, processing this. "My Uncle Caleb says pretending is a waste of good energy." Eleanor smiled. "Your Uncle Caleb is a wise man. He talks about you sometimes. At home." "Does he?" Eleanor tried to keep her voice neutral. "He says you're the best thing that's happened to this town in years, and that you're brave for starting over when most people would just give up and be sad." Sarah looked up at her with those intelligent eyes. "Are you brave, Mrs. Brooks? Or are you just running away?" The question was so adult, so perceptive, that Eleanor had to take a moment before answering. "Maybe both. Maybe running away from the wrong life and toward the right one takes the same kind of bravery." "That makes sense." Sarah smiled, a quick, shy expression. "I'm glad you came here. You make school feel like it matters." "It does matter. You matter, Sarah." After Sarah went back outside, Eleanor stood at the window a while longer, watching the snow fall and thinking about conversations and children who saw too much, and men who made her feel things she'd thought were long dead. That evening, as she was locking up the schoolhouse, she heard a wagon approach. Caleb pulled up, looking wind-burned and tired. "Heading home?" he asked. "Yes. Is everything all right?" "Fine. Just finished hauling supplies from town. Thought I'd check on the schoolhouse before the storm gets worse." He glanced at the sky, which had grown darker and more threatening. "We're in for a bad one tonight. You should get back to the boarding house soon." "I will. I'm just finishing up." He climbed down from the wagon, tied the horses, and walked with her to check that all the shutters were secure. They worked in comfortable silence, Caleb reaching the high latches Eleanor couldn't quite manage, Eleanor making sure the lower ones were properly fastened. "Sarah said something interesting today," Eleanor ventured as they worked. "Sarah says a lot of interesting things. Comes from being too smart for her own good." She asked if I was brave or just running away. Caleb paused, his hand on a shutter. "What did you tell her?" "That maybe it's both." He turned to look at her, snowflakes catching in his dark hair. "She's not wrong to ask. I've wondered the same thing myself sometimes." "About me?" "About both of us." He leaned against the schoolhouse wall, his expression thoughtful. "I came out here when I was 18, running from a family that wanted me to be something I wasn't. My brother followed a year later, running from the same thing. We built the ranch, built lives, told ourselves we were brave pioneers, but maybe we were just cowards who couldn't face staying in Pennsylvania and fighting for who we wanted to be." "What did your family want you to be?" "Respectable. Settled. Working in the family business. Coal mining. My father wanted sons who'd take over when he retired. Instead, he got 2 boys who lit out for Wyoming the first chance they got." Caleb smiled without humor. "He never forgave us, died angry. I don't even know if my mother's still alive. We lost touch years ago." Eleanor heard the pain beneath the words. "Do you regret it? Leaving?" "No. Yes. Sometimes." He pushed off from the wall. "I regret hurting them. I don't regret building a life that actually fits me. You understand that, I think." "I do." They stood in the falling snow, 2 people who'd run toward different versions of freedom and found themselves in the same small town on the edge of nowhere. "Eleanor," Caleb said quietly, "I need to tell you something." Her heart started beating faster. All right. I enjoy your company, more than I've enjoyed anyone's company in a long time. And I hope, you enjoy mine too. But I want you to know I'm not trying to, that is, I don't expect, he stopped, frustrated. I'm making a mess of this. You're not, Eleanor said softly. I understand what you're trying to say. Do you? You're saying we're friends, and you value that friendship, and you don't want me to think you have ulterior motives. Something like that, though ulterior motives makes me sound like a scoundrel. He smiled, that slow, warm smile that did dangerous things to her equilibrium. I'm just a rancher who likes talking to the school teacher, who thinks she's remarkable and brave and worth knowing, who wants to spend more time with her, if she's willing. Eleanor's throat felt tight. I'd like that, very much. Good. That's good. He seemed relieved. I should let you get back before the storm gets worse, but maybe, would you want to come to the ranch sometime? See where Sarah lives? She'd love to show you around. I'd enjoy that. Sunday afternoon, then. I'll pick you up after church. Eleanor nodded, not trusting her voice. Caleb touched his hat, climbed back into his wagon, and drove off into the thickening snow. She watched until he disappeared, then walked back to the boarding house with her heart doing complicated things in her chest. Ida took one look at her face and said, "Oh, you're in trouble now." "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do. And for what it's worth, I'm happy for you." Eleanor wanted to protest, to insist nothing was happening, that they were just friends. But standing there in the warmth of the boarding house with snow melting in her hair and her heart still racing, she couldn't quite make herself lie. Sunday arrived with the kind of bright, cold sunshine that made the snow-covered world look like something out of a fairy tale. Eleanor dressed carefully in her best day dress, the dark blue one with modest trim, and tried not to feel like she was preparing for something more significant than a simple visit to a ranch. Caleb arrived after church in a wagon that had been cleaned and polished. He helped her up onto the seat, and they headed west out of town, following a road that was more suggestion than reality beneath the snow. "The ranch is about 5 miles out," Caleb explained. "We've got 300 head of cattle, 20 horses, and enough land to make it work if we're smart and lucky. My brother and I started with nothing, just grit and stubbornness. Took us 10 years to build it into something that could actually support a family. You must be proud of what you've accomplished. Proud, tired, both." He glanced at her. "Ranching's not romantic, Eleanor. It's hard work and worry and praying the weather cooperates. But it's mine. Ours. That means something." They crested a rise, and Eleanor caught her first glimpse of the Triple T. The ranch house was a sturdy 2-story structure built from logs and stone, with smoke curling from 2 chimneys. Barns and outbuildings clustered nearby. Horses grazed in a snow-dusted paddock. Mountains rose in the distance, purple against the blue sky. It was beautiful. Austere and wild and completely beautiful. "Welcome to the Triple T," Caleb said softly. Sarah burst from the house before the wagon even stopped, her face alight with excitement. "Mrs. Brooks, you came. Come inside, it's warm. I've been baking." The interior of the ranch house was nothing like Eleanor expected. It was clean, organized, and surprisingly comfortable. Handmade furniture that showed real craftsmanship, curtains at the windows, books on shelves, more books than she would have guessed a bachelor rancher and a young girl would own. "Sarah and I like to read," Caleb said, noticing her surprise. "We order books from catalogs. Sometimes takes months to arrive, but it's worth it." They spent the afternoon in easy companionship. Sarah showed Eleanor her room, her treasures, the spots on the ranch where she liked to hide and read. Caleb gave them a tour of the barns, introducing Eleanor to horses and explaining the ranch operation with the quiet pride of someone who'd built something from nothing. Later, they sat around the kitchen table drinking coffee while Sarah chattered about school and Eleanor listened, and Caleb watched them both with an expression that made Eleanor's chest ache. "This," she thought, "this is what happiness feels like." "I should get you back before dark," Caleb said eventually, with obvious reluctance. "Weather can turn fast out here." The ride back to town was quieter than the ride out. Eleanor found herself acutely aware of Caleb beside her, The warmth of his body, the steady strength in his hands on the reins, the comfortable silence between them that didn't need filling. "Thank you for today," she said as they approached Dry Creek. "It was lovely. Thank you for coming. Sarah's been talking about it all week, and He paused. "I liked having you there, at the ranch. It felt right." Something in the way he said it made Eleanor brave. "It felt right to me, too." He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the boarding house, but didn't immediately help her down. Instead, he turned to face her, his expression serious. "Eleanor, I know we said we're friends, and we are, but I need to be honest with you about something." Her heart started pounding. "What is it?" "I'm 43 years old. I've been alone for 10 years. I thought I was fine with that. Thought I'd had my chance at love, and that was enough for one lifetime. But then you showed up in Dry Creek, stubborn and brave and not caring what anyone thought, and you made me remember what it feels like to want something. Someone." Eleanor couldn't breathe, couldn't move. "I'm not asking for anything," Caleb continued quietly. "I just needed you to know. I value your friendship more than anything. But if there was ever a chance of more than friendship, I'd want you to know I'd be interested, very interested." The world seemed to narrow to just the two of them, his eyes on hers, the cold air, the fading light, the moment hanging between them like something fragile and precious. "Caleb," Eleanor whispered, "I'm 50 years old." "I know. I'm a widow, a school teacher. I have children who already think I've lost my mind. I know all of that. I don't know if I even remember how to. I was married for 30 years to a good man who I cared for but never really loved. Not the way people talk about love. I don't know if I'm capable of—" He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm around hers. "I'm not asking you to know anything right now. I'm just asking you to think about it, to consider the possibility that maybe we both deserve a second chance at feeling something real." Eleanor looked down at their joined hands and felt something crack open in her chest. Something that had been locked away for so long she'd forgotten it existed. "I'll think about it," she whispered. "That's all I'm asking." He smiled and squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. "Come on, let's get you inside before you freeze." He helped her down from the wagon, his hand steady at her waist, and for just a moment they stood close enough that Eleanor could see the silver threading through his dark hair, the fine lines around his eyes, the hope and uncertainty in his expression. "Good night, Caleb." "Good night, Eleanor." She turned and walked into the boarding house without looking back, her heart racing and her mind spinning, and everything she thought she knew about her life suddenly feeling uncertain and possible and terrifying all at once. Ida was waiting, of course. "Well," she demanded. Eleanor sank into a chair in the parlor, pulled off her gloves with shaking hands, and said, "I think I might be falling in love with Caleb Turner." "Hallelujah. I thought you'd never figure it out." "Ida, I'm 50 years old. This is insane. This is living. There's a difference." Ida sat across from her, her expression gentle. "Eleanor, you came all the way to Wyoming because you wanted to feel alive again. Now someone's offering you the chance to feel even more alive, and you're scared. I understand that. But don't let fear steal this from you. What if it doesn't work? What if I'm too old, too set in my ways, What if it does work? What if you get 20 years of happiness with a good man? What if you get even 5? Wouldn't that be worth the risk?" Eleanor thought about Caleb's hand around hers, the warmth in his eyes, the way he'd said, "I'm not asking for anything," even though he clearly wanted everything. She thought about spending the rest of her life teaching and going home alone and being safe and respectable and slowly fading into invisibility. She thought about the woman she'd been in New York, dutiful, proper, half alive, and the woman she was becoming in Wyoming, stronger, braver, more herself than she'd ever been. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "Good. That means it matters." Ida reached across and patted her hand. "Now go to bed and think about it, and tomorrow, when you see him again, you'll know what to do." But Eleanor didn't see Caleb the next day, or the day after that. A storm rolled in, the worst yet, and Dry Creek shut down, everyone huddled inside waiting for it to pass. Snow piled against buildings, wind howled, the temperature plummeted. Eleanor kept the schoolhouse closed and spent 3 days at the boarding house, helping Ida with chores and worrying about her students and trying not to think about Caleb out at his ranch, hoping he was safe and warm and not in any danger. On the 4th day, the storm finally broke. Eleanor woke to brilliant sunshine and silence, the kind of silence that only comes after days of wind and chaos. She dressed quickly and went to the schoolhouse, needing to make sure it had survived the storm intact. She found Caleb already there, shoveling snow from the steps. "You're here," she said stupidly. He looked up, his face tired but smiling. "Rode in early. Wanted to make sure the schoolhouse was ready for tomorrow, assuming you're planning to open again?" "Yes, the children will be going stir-crazy after being trapped inside for days." Figured as much. He went back to shoveling. "How are you? You weather the storm all right?" "I'm fine. Ida's boarding house is solid. How's the ranch? How's Sarah?" "We're good. Lost some shingles off the barn, but nothing serious. Sarah's been reading every book we own twice over. She'll be happy to get back to school." They worked together in companionable silence, Caleb shoveling while Eleanor swept snow from the porch and checked the windows for damage. The morning sun turned everything diamond bright, and despite the bone-deep cold, Eleanor felt almost warm. "Eleanor," Caleb said eventually, leaning on his shovel, "about what I said the other day. I've been thinking about it." "And?" She set down her broom and turned to face him fully. The moment felt huge, weighted with possibility. "And I'm terrified. But I think I'd like to find out what happens next. Between us. If you're still interested." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise. "I'm still interested. I need to go slowly. I need time to figure out what this is and what I want, and we'll go as slowly as you need. I'm not going anywhere, Eleanor. I waited 10 years without even knowing I was waiting for someone. I can wait a little longer to do this right." He reached for her hand and Eleanor let him take it. They stood together in the bright cold morning, two middle-aged people who'd been through enough to know that happiness was rare and precious and worth fighting for. "I should warn you," Eleanor said. "I have no idea what I'm doing." "Neither do I," Caleb laughed. "We'll figure it out together." And standing there with her hand in his, and the sun brilliant on the snow, and the whole future stretching out uncertain and possible before them, Eleanor Brooks felt something she hadn't felt in 30 years. Hope. The weeks that followed felt like learning to breathe in a new rhythm. Eleanor went through her days teaching, grading papers, managing the small dramas of frontier childhood, but underneath it all ran a current of awareness, of possibility, that changed everything. Caleb started appearing at the schoolhouse more often, not intrusively, not obviously enough to start tongues wagging, but enough that Eleanor grew accustomed to looking up and finding him there, fixing a loose board, checking the stove, bringing firewood that mysteriously replenished itself overnight. "You don't have to do all this," she said one afternoon as he stacked wood outside the door. "I know, but I want to." He straightened, brushing bark from his gloves. "Besides, Sarah would have my hide if I let her favorite teacher freeze." "Is that the only reason?" He looked at her then, and the warmth in his eyes made her stomach flutter in a way she'd thought she was too old to experience. "You know it's not." They were careful, so careful. They didn't touch in public beyond what was proper. They didn't let their conversations linger where others might notice. But Eleanor felt the pull between them growing stronger with each passing day, and it both thrilled and terrified her. On Friday evenings, after school let out, Caleb would sometimes wait to walk her back to the boarding house. They took the long way, through the quieter parts of town, and talked about everything and nothing. He told her about ranch life, about the cattle market, about his dreams of expanding the operation. She told him about her children, about the life she'd left behind, about discovering that teaching was the one thing she'd done that felt entirely her own. "Do you ever regret marrying William?" Caleb asked one evening as they walked beneath a sky turning purple with dusk. Eleanor considered the question carefully. "No, he was a good man and our marriage gave me my children. But I regret not knowing there could be more. I thought what we had was what marriage was supposed to be. Comfortable, functional, safe. I didn't know people could actually want each other, choose each other every day, not out of duty, but out of genuine desire to be together." Is that what you want now? That kind of marriage? I don't know if I want marriage at all, she said honestly. I don't know what I want, Caleb. Except. Except what? She stopped walking and turned to face him. They were on a side street, away from prying eyes, and the fading light made everything feel hushed and private. Except I know I want more time with you. I want to know what happens when we stop being so careful. I want. She broke off, frustrated with her inability to articulate feelings she'd spent a lifetime suppressing. Caleb stepped closer, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel his warmth. Eleanor Brooks, are you saying you want to court properly? I'm 50 years old. I don't think people our age court. Then what would you call it? I'd call it two adults who enjoy each other's company, spending more time together without all this tiptoeing around propriety. She lifted her chin. I'd call it choosing what I want instead of what people think I should want. His smile was slow and devastating. I can work with that. Can you? Eleanor, I've spent 10 years alone. I know how to be patient, but I also know what I want, and I want you. However we define it, whatever we call it, I want to see where this goes. The raw honesty in his voice undid something in Eleanor. Before she could second-guess herself, she reached up and touched his face, just briefly, her fingertips grazing his bearded cheek. He went very still, his eyes darkening. I want that too, she whispered. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her. She could see the desire in his face, feel the tension in the air between them. But instead, he caught her hand and brought it to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that was somehow more intimate than anything she'd experienced in 30 years of marriage. Not here, he said quietly. Not where anyone might see and make it into gossip. You deserve better than that. Where then? Sunday. Come to the ranch again. We'll have privacy there. We can talk without worrying about who's watching. Eleanor nodded, not trusting her voice. Caleb released her hand slowly, and they walked the rest of the way to the boarding house in charged silence. Ida took one look at Eleanor's face when she came inside and said, Whatever just happened, I approve. Nothing happened. Eleanor Brooks, I've known you for 3 months now, and that's the worst lie you've ever told. She followed Eleanor to the parlor. But I won't pry. Just be happy. You've earned it. That night, Eleanor lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, her body humming with an energy she didn't know what to do with. She felt like she was standing on the edge of something vast and unknown, and the sensible part of her, the part that had governed her life for 50 years, was screaming warnings. But there was another part, quieter but growing stronger, that whispered, Jump. Saturday brought unexpected trouble. Mary Rawlings showed up at the boarding house just after breakfast, her face pale and her arm cradled against her chest at an unnatural angle. Eleanor answered the door to find the girl swaying on the porch, clearly in shock. Mary, what happened? I fell, the girl said automatically. The lie was practiced, smooth. Down the stairs. My arm hurts awful bad, Mrs. Brooks. Eleanor knew a broken bone when she saw one. She also knew the difference between an accident and something deliberate. But she pulled Mary inside, settled her in the parlor, and sent Ida running for the doctor while she tried to keep the girl calm. Mary, she said gently, wrapping a blanket around the child's shoulders, I need you to tell me the truth. Did someone hurt you? I fell. Mary, I fell. The girl's voice rose, panicked. Please don't ask me nothing else. I just fell, that's all. Dr. Morrison arrived within minutes, a gruff older man who'd seen everything frontier life could throw at him. He examined Mary's arm with gentle efficiency, his expression growing grimmer by the moment. It's broken, he announced. Clean break, at least. I'll need to set it. Eleanor, hold her steady. This is going to hurt. Mary screamed when he set the bone, a sound that tore through Eleanor's chest. Ida appeared with laudanum, and they got some down the girl's throat to ease the pain. The doctor splinted the arm and wrapped it carefully. She'll need to keep this immobile for 6 weeks, he said, and she needs rest and good food. Where are her parents? I'll take her home, Eleanor said, though everything in her rebelled at the thought. Like hell you will. The doctor's eyes were hard. That girl's got bruises on top of bruises, Eleanor. Some of them weeks old. This wasn't any fall downstairs. I know that, you know that, But unless Mary tells us what really happened. I fell, Mary insisted, tears streaming down her face. I'm clumsy, that's all. Please don't make trouble, please. The fear in her voice was worse than the pain had been. Eleanor exchanged looks with the doctor and Ida, feeling helpless. I'll take her home, Sheriff Garrett said from the doorway. They all turned to find him standing there, his expression troubled. And I'll have a word with Tom Rawlings while I'm at it. Be careful, Dr. Morrison warned. Tom's got a mean streak when he's been drinking. I know, but this has gone far enough. The sheriff looked at Mary with something like pity. Come on, child, let's get you home. After they left, Eleanor sank into a chair, shaking with fury and helplessness. We can't just send her back there. He's hurting her. You think I don't know that? Dr. Morrison's voice was weary. I've patched up that girl 6 times in the last year, but unless she tells us what's happening, or unless someone actually witnesses it, there's not a damn thing we can do. Family law out here is murky at best. That's not good enough. No, it's not. But it's reality. He picked up his medical bag. Keep an eye on her, Eleanor. At school. If she says anything, if you see anything, you come get me or the sheriff immediately. After he left, Eleanor sat in the parlor while Ida made tea. Neither of them wanted and felt the weight of her powerlessness like a stone in her chest. I hate this, she said quietly. I know. Ida set down the teapot. But you're doing what you can. You're watching out for her. That matters. Eleanor thought about Mary's terrified face, her automatic lies, her desperate plea not to make trouble. She thought about Tom Rawlings, drunk and mean and untouchable behind the shield of family privacy. It's not enough, she whispered. That afternoon, against her better judgment, Eleanor walked to the sheriff's office. She found Sheriff Garrett at his desk, looking exhausted. How is she? Eleanor demanded. Home. Safe for the moment. I had words with Tom. He rubbed his face. He denied everything, of course. Said the girl's accident-prone, always has been. His wife backed him up. His wife is terrified of him. I know that too, Eleanor, but knowing and proving are different things. He looked up at her, his expression weary. I'm not the enemy here. I want to help that girl, but I need evidence. I need her to tell me the truth, or I need to catch him in the act. Until then, my hands are tied. Eleanor wanted to scream. Instead, she took a deep breath and forced herself to think. What if I kept her after school sometimes? Extra lessons. It would give her time away from home, at least. That might help. And it might make things worse when she does go home. He paused. Be careful, Eleanor. Tom's already made threats about you. Don't give him more ammunition. I don't care about his threats. You should. Men like Tom Rawlings are dangerous when cornered, and if he thinks you're trying to take his daughter from him, I'm trying to protect her. I know. Just be smart about it. Eleanor left the sheriff's office with her mind churning. She needed to talk to someone. She needed counsel from someone who understood the complexities of frontier justice and family dynamics. She needed Caleb. Without letting herself overthink it, she borrowed Ida's buggy and drove out to the Triple T Ranch. The 5-mile journey gave her time to question her impulsiveness, but by the time she arrived, her resolve had only strengthened. Caleb was in the barn when she drove up. He emerged at the sound of the buggy, his expression shifting from surprise to concern when he saw her face. Eleanor, what's wrong? She climbed down without waiting for help and walked straight to him. Mary Rawlings showed up at the boarding house this morning with a broken arm. Tom Rawlings did it. Everyone knows it. But no one can do anything about it because she won't admit the truth, and the law doesn't care. Caleb's jaw tightened. That son of a... He stopped, visibly controlling his temper. Is she all right? Her arms set. She's back home with the man who broke it. So no, she's not all right. Eleanor felt tears of frustration burning behind her eyes. I can't just stand by and do nothing, Caleb. I can't. I know. He reached for her hand, then seemed to remember they weren't alone. Ranch hands were working nearby, and let his arm drop. Come inside, we'll talk. They walked to the ranch house in tense silence. Inside, Caleb poured coffee and sat across from her at the kitchen table, his expression grave. Tell me everything, he said. Eleanor did. She told him about Mary showing up. about the doctor's examination, about the sheriff's helplessness, about her own furious inability to fix the situation. Caleb listened without interrupting, his face growing darker with each detail. "The sheriff's right about one thing," he said finally. "Tom Rawlings is dangerous. If he thinks you're a threat to his authority over his family, he could retaliate." "I don't care." "Eleanor, I don't care," she repeated fiercely. "That child is being hurt. If no one else will protect her, then I will, whatever the consequences." Caleb looked at her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression, admiration mixed with concern. "You're the bravest woman I've ever met, and the most stubborn. Is that a problem?" "No." He reached across the table and took her hand, properly this time, propriety be damned. "But I won't let you face him alone. If you're going to fight for Mary, I'm fighting with you." Eleanor's throat went tight. "Caleb, I mean it. You're not alone in this, Eleanor. Not anymore." His grip tightened on her hand. "We'll figure something out. Talk to the school board, maybe. If they make attending school mandatory, it keeps Mary away from home more hours. Or we could... We..." He met her eyes steadily. "Yes, we. You think I'm going to stand back and watch you take this on by yourself? You think I don't care what happens to you?" The intensity in his voice made her breath catch. "I came here because I needed advice. I didn't mean to drag you into my problems. Your problems are my problems. That's what this is, Eleanor. That's what we're building." He stood, still holding her hand, and drew her to her feet. "I care about you, more than I've cared about anyone in 10 years. If you're fighting for something, I'm standing beside you. That's not negotiable." They stood inches apart in his quiet kitchen, hands clasped, everything they'd been carefully not saying suddenly impossible to ignore. "Caleb," Eleanor whispered, "I'm scared. Of Rawlings. Of this. Of us. Of feeling things I didn't think I'd ever feel again." She looked up at him, her eyes burning. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to want someone the way I want you." His other hand came up to cup her face, his calloused palm warm against her cheek. "Then we'll figure it out together, one day at a time, one moment at a time." "I'm 50 years old. Stop saying that like it's a flaw." His thumb brushed her cheekbone. "You're 50 years old and beautiful and fierce and exactly what I didn't know I was waiting for. Your age doesn't frighten me, Eleanor. What frightens me is the thought of not having you in my life." Eleanor's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm falling in love with you. Probably already have fallen, and I know it's fast, and I know it's complicated, and I know you need time, but I can't pretend anymore that this is just friendship or just companionship. It's more. It's everything." The words hung between them, raw and honest and terrifying. Eleanor felt like she was standing on that precipice again, the one she'd been circling for weeks, and this time the choice was clear. She could step back, protect herself, keep things safe and manageable, or she could jump. "I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered, "and it terrifies me." "Good." Caleb's smile was gentle. "We'll be terrified together." And then, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and kissed her. It was nothing like the kisses she'd shared with William. Those had been dutiful, pleasant, forgettable. This was different. This was Caleb's lips soft against hers, his hand cradling her face like she was precious, his breath mixing with hers as he took his time, as if they had all the time in the world. Eleanor's hands came up to grip his shirt, anchoring herself, and something inside her that had been locked away for decades finally broke free. She kissed him back with a hunger that shocked her, 30 years of unexpressed desire pouring into this one perfect moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "That was worth waiting for," he said roughly. Eleanor laughed, a shaky sound that was half sob. "I've never been kissed like that in my life." "Good. I plan to kiss you like that as often as you'll let me." She pulled back to look at him, this man who'd somehow become essential to her in the space of a few months. "Caleb Turner, what are we doing?" "We're choosing each other, that's all. Just choosing each other and seeing where it leads. People will talk. Let them. I'm supposed to be a respectable school teacher. You are respectable. You're also allowed to be happy." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. Unless you're having second thoughts. Eleanor considered the question seriously. Was she having second thoughts? About getting involved with a man almost 10 years her junior? About risking her reputation, her position, the carefully ordered life she'd only just begun building? No, she said firmly. No second thoughts. Only first thoughts about a future I didn't think I could have. He kissed her again, slower this time, deeper, and Eleanor surrendered to it completely. She let herself feel the strength of his arms around her, the warmth of his body against hers, the overwhelming rightness of being held by someone who wanted her not out of duty or obligation, but out of genuine desire. When they finally pulled apart, both flushed and breathing hard, reality came crashing back. I should go, Eleanor said reluctantly. Before it gets dark, before someone notices I've been gone too long. I know. But Caleb didn't release her immediately. Eleanor, about Mary Rawlings, we'll figure something out, I promise, but you need to be careful. Don't confront Tom directly. Don't do anything that puts you in danger. I can take care of myself. I know you can, but let me worry about you anyway. She smiled, reaching up to touch his face one more time. All right, I'll be careful. He walked her out to the buggy, helped her up, and stood watching as she drove away. Eleanor looked back once and saw him still standing there, backlit by the setting sun, and felt her heart do something complicated and wonderful in her chest. The drive back to town gave her time to process what had just happened. She'd kissed Caleb Turner. She'd admitted she was falling in love with him. She'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross, and instead of feeling frightened or guilty, she felt alive. Truly, gloriously alive. Ida was waiting on the porch when Eleanor returned the buggy. One look at Eleanor's face and she started grinning. So, she said, how's the ranch? Beautiful. And Caleb? Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. Also beautiful. Ida's grin widened. It's about damn time. Come inside and tell me everything. Over tea in the kitchen, Eleanor found herself confessing the whole afternoon. Mary's injury, her trip to the ranch, her conversation with Caleb, the kiss that had changed everything. He said he's falling in love with me, Eleanor finished, her voice wondering. Me. At 50 years old, widowed, set in my ways. He said he's falling in love with me. Of course he is. You're extraordinary, Eleanor. The only person who doesn't see that is you. Ida topped off her tea. But I need to warn you about something. What? This won't stay secret for long. Dry Creek is small. People notice things. And when they start talking, and they will, it won't all be kind. You're the school teacher. You're supposed to be above reproach. A relationship with Caleb, especially one that moves quickly, will give people ammunition. Eleanor had already considered this. I know, but I'm tired of living my life according to other people's rules. I did that for 30 years. It nearly killed something essential in me. I won't do it again. Good. I just wanted you to be prepared. Ida's expression softened. For what it's worth, I think you and Caleb are perfect for each other. You both deserve happiness. Don't let small-minded people steal that from you. That night, lying in bed, Eleanor replayed the kiss over and over. The feel of Caleb's lips on hers, the strength of his arms, the way he'd looked at her like she was something precious and desired and worth choosing. She'd thought that part of her life was over. She'd thought desire and passion and physical intimacy were things that belonged to youth, that 50-year-old widows were supposed to be content with memories and propriety. She'd been wrong. And now that she'd tasted what was possible, she wasn't sure she could ever go back to the half-life she'd been living before. Sunday arrived cold and bright. Eleanor dressed carefully for church, trying to look respectable and appropriate while her heart raced at the thought of seeing Caleb again. She found him in his usual pew with Sarah, who waved excitedly when she spotted Eleanor. Caleb turned and their eyes met across the church. The heat in his gaze made Eleanor's breath catch. After the service, they stood on the church steps, making polite conversation with other parishioners, carefully not standing too close, carefully not letting their hands touch. But Eleanor felt the pull between them like a physical thing. Mrs. Brooks, Sarah said, tugging on Eleanor's sleeve. Uncle Caleb says you might come to Sunday dinner again. Will you? I'd love to, if your uncle doesn't mind. Mind? Caleb's voice was carefully neutral, but his eyes were warm. It would be my pleasure. They rode out to the ranch together, Sarah chattering happily between them, serving as the perfect buffer and chaperone. But once they arrived and Sarah ran off to change out of her church clothes, Eleanor and Caleb stood in the ranch house kitchen, suddenly alone and hyper-aware of each other. "I've been thinking about you," Caleb said quietly. "About yesterday. About that kiss. So have I. Any regrets?" "None." Eleanor moved closer to him, emboldened by the privacy and by the memory of how right it had felt to be in his arms. "Should I have regrets?" "No." He reached for her, pulling her close. "But I wanted to make sure. I don't want to rush you, Eleanor. I don't want you to feel pressured or—" She silenced him with a kiss. This time she initiated it, rising on her toes to press her lips to his, and the surprised pleasure in his response made her smile against his mouth. When they broke apart, Caleb was breathing hard. "We should stop. Sarah will be back any minute." "I know." But Eleanor didn't step back. "Caleb, I need to tell you something. I was married for 30 years. I had children. I did my wifely duty. But I never felt with William what I feel with you. The way you kiss me, the way you look at me, it's entirely new, and I don't know what to do with all these feelings." "You don't have to do anything except feel them. We'll figure out the rest as we go." He cupped her face in his hands. "I know we're moving fast. I know this is unconventional. But Eleanor, I meant what I said yesterday. I'm falling in love with you. Maybe I already have, and I don't want to waste time pretending otherwise." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want more than stolen kisses and careful propriety. I want a life with you. I want to wake up next to you. I want to sit across the breakfast table from you every morning. I want to build something real with you." Eleanor's heart was pounding. "You're talking about marriage." "Eventually, yes, if that's what you want. But I'm not asking for an answer now. I'm just asking you to think about it, to consider the possibility that maybe we've both earned a second chance at happiness." Before Eleanor could respond, they heard Sarah's footsteps on the stairs. They stepped apart, composing themselves, but Eleanor's mind was spinning. Marriage. To Caleb. A life on the ranch, teaching and building something new, choosing passion over propriety. The idea should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like coming home. Dinner was a relaxed affair, the three of them talking and laughing around the kitchen table. Sarah was full of questions about school, about New York, about Eleanor's life before Dry Creek. Caleb watched them both with an expression of contentment that made Eleanor's chest ache. This could be her life. This warmth, this belonging, this family that wasn't bound by duty, but by choice. After dinner, while Sarah washed dishes, Caleb walked Eleanor out to the buggy. The sun was setting, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of rose and gold. "Think about what I said," Caleb murmured, his hand warm on the small of her back. "About marriage. About a future together. I'm not asking for an answer today or tomorrow, but I want you to know I'm serious about this. About you." "I'll think about it," Eleanor promised. "But Caleb, my children, they already think I've lost my mind coming to Wyoming. If I marry again, and to someone younger, are you planning to live your life for your children's approval?" The question stopped her cold. Was she? She'd already defied them by coming west. Would she let their potential disapproval stop her from choosing happiness? "No," she said firmly. "No, I'm not." "Good." He smiled and kissed her forehead. "Now go home before it gets too dark. And Eleanor?" "Yes?" "I love you. I know it's fast, I know it's complicated, but I love you, and I think you love me too." Eleanor looked up at this man who'd somehow become everything and felt the truth of it settle in her bones. "I do. I love you, Caleb Turner, even though it terrifies me." "We'll be terrified together," he said, echoing his words from the day before. "Now go, before I decide to keep you here." The drive back to town felt dreamlike. Eleanor kept replaying Caleb's words, his proposal. Not a formal proposal yet, but the promise of one. The possibility of building a life together. She was 50 years old. She'd already had one marriage, raised 4 children, lived a respectable life according to society's rules. She was supposed to be settling into quiet widowhood, not falling in love like a girl of 20. But here she was, her heart racing and her body humming with desire, and her entire future suddenly wide open with possibility. At the boarding house, she found a letter waiting, forwarded from New York. Margaret's handwriting on the envelope. Eleanor took it to her room and sat on the bed, staring at it for a long moment before opening it. The letter was exactly what she'd expected. Concerned, condescending, full of gentle suggestions that Eleanor come home, that she'd proved her point, that it was time to return to civilization and family and reason. At the bottom, in a postscript, Margaret had added, "Mother, you're 50 years old. This adventure of yours has gone on long enough. It's time to act your age." Eleanor read the letter twice, then carefully folded it and set it aside. Tomorrow she would write a response. But tonight she simply sat in her small room and thought about what acting her age actually meant. Did it mean fading quietly into invisibility? Accepting that desire and passion and new beginnings were only for the young? Or did it mean having the wisdom to recognize happiness when it appeared, and the courage to reach for it regardless of what anyone else thought? Eleanor knew which one she chose. She pulled out her own writing paper and began a different letter, to Caleb, though she'd see him in just a few days. She wrote about her feelings, about her fears, about the future she was beginning to imagine. She wrote until her hand cramped and the candle burned low. At the end, she wrote, "I don't know what I'm doing, but I know I want to do it with you." She sealed the letter, set it on her bureau to give to him when she saw him next, and finally let herself sleep. Her dreams were full of snow and starlight and the warmth of Caleb's arms around her, and for the first time in 30 years, Eleanor Brooks woke up smiling. The letter sat on Eleanor's bureau for 2 days before she found the courage to give it to Caleb. Not because she doubted what she'd written, but because once she handed it over, there would be no taking back the words. No pretending she hadn't just laid her heart bare on paper. She finally gave it to him on Wednesday afternoon, after school let out. He'd stopped by to fix a hinge on the schoolhouse door that had been squeaking, and when the work was done and they stood alone in the empty classroom, Eleanor pulled the envelope from her desk drawer. "I wrote you something," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "You don't have to read it now, but I wanted you to have it." Caleb took the letter, his calloused fingers careful with the paper. "Should I be worried?" "No, maybe. I don't know." Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Just read it when you're ready." He studied her face for a moment, then tucked the letter inside his coat. "I'll treasure it, whatever it says. Even if it's just me rambling about my feelings? Especially if it's that." He glanced toward the windows, checking that they were still alone, then pulled her close for a quick, fierce kiss. "I'll read it tonight, and I'll write you back." Eleanor watched him leave, her lips still tingling from the kiss, and wondered when she'd become the kind of woman who kissed men in schoolhouses in broad daylight. The thought made her smile. That evening, as she was helping Ida prepare supper, there was a knock at the boarding house door. Eleanor answered to find Sheriff Garrett standing there, his hat in his hands and his expression troubled. "Mrs. Brooks, I need to speak with you. It's about Mary Rawlings." Eleanor's stomach dropped. "What happened? Is she hurt again?" "No, not yet anyway." He glanced past her. "Mind if I come in?" They settled in the parlor, and the sheriff leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Tom Rawlings came to see me today. He's filed a formal complaint against you." "Against me? For what?" "For interfering with his family. For trying to turn his daughter against him. For, and I'm quoting here, filling the girl's head with ideas above her station." The sheriff's expression was apologetic. "He's demanding you stop keeping Mary after school for extra lessons. Says you're overstepping your authority as teacher." Eleanor felt fury rise in her throat. "I'm trying to protect her." "I know that. You know that. But legally, he's within his rights to decide how his daughter spends her time outside of required school hours." The sheriff held up a hand before Eleanor could protest. "I'm not saying I agree with him. I'm saying this is the reality. If you keep pushing, he could get you dismissed from your teaching position." "He's hurting her, Sheriff. Everyone knows it. Knowing it and proving it are different things. And until Mary tells the truth or someone witnesses him actually harming her, my hands are tied." He stood, clearly uncomfortable. "I came to warn you. Be careful. Tom's not just angry. He's feeling cornered. Men like that are dangerous. After he left, Eleanor sat in the parlor, shaking with impotent rage. Ida appeared with tea neither of them wanted. I heard, Ida said quietly. Eleanor, maybe you should listen to the sheriff. Maybe backing off is the smart thing to do. I can't just abandon her. You're not abandoning her. You're teaching her during school hours. You're watching out for her. But if you lose your job over this, you can't help her at all. Eleanor knew Ida was right. But the thought of stepping back, of doing nothing while Mary went home each day to that house, made her feel sick. She needed to talk to Caleb. The next morning, she sent word to the ranch with Sarah, asking Caleb to meet her at the schoolhouse after classes ended. When he arrived, she was sitting at her desk, staring at the blackboard without seeing it. Eleanor? He crossed to her immediately. What's wrong? She told him about the sheriff's visit, about Tom Rawlings' complaint, about the impossible choice between protecting Mary and protecting her own position. Caleb listened, his expression growing darker with each word. That bastard, he said when she finished. He's using the law to shield himself while he hurts his own child. I don't know what to do. If I keep Mary after school, he could get me fired. But if you don't, she goes home to him every day with no buffer, no protection. Caleb paced the classroom, clearly thinking. There has to be another way. Something that keeps you safe while also helping Mary. I don't see how. The law's on his side. Then we work around the law. He stopped pacing and turned to face her. What if Sarah invited Mary to the ranch on weekends, to study together, help with chores, that sort of thing? It's not you directly interfering, it's just two girls being friends. Rawlings can't complain about that. Eleanor felt hope flicker. Would that work? I don't see why not. Sarah already likes Mary, and it gets the girl out of that house for a few hours each week. It's not perfect, but it's something. Caleb, I can't ask you to take this risk. If Rawlings finds out you're helping, then he'll have me to deal with instead of you. And I'm not a school teacher he can threaten with dismissal. Caleb's smile was grim. Let him come at me. I'd welcome the excuse. Eleanor rose and went to him, taking his hands in hers. You don't have to fight my battles. Yes, I do. That's what people do when they love each other. They stand together. He pulled her close. Besides, this isn't just your battle. It's about protecting a child. That matters to both of us. She rested her forehead against his chest, drawing strength from his solid presence. Did you read my letter? I did. Last night, by lamplight in my kitchen. His arms tightened around her. Eleanor, the things you wrote, about wanting a future with me, about being terrified but choosing it anyway. I've read that letter 6 times already. And I want to give you something. He released her and reached into his pocket, pulling out a small object wrapped in cloth. It was my mother's, the only thing I took when I left Pennsylvania. I want you to have it. Eleanor unwrapped the cloth to reveal a ring, simple gold with a small garnet stone that caught the afternoon light. Caleb, she breathed, I'm not asking you to wear it yet, not publicly. I know we need time, and I know you need to think about everything, but I want you to have it, as a promise. When you're ready, if you're ready, I want to marry you, Eleanor Brooks. I want to build a life with you. I want to wake up every morning and know you're mine, and I'm yours. Eleanor stared at the ring, her vision blurring with tears. My children will think I've lost my mind. Have you? Maybe. Probably. She looked up at him through tears. But I don't care. I love you, Caleb. I love you in a way I didn't know was possible. And yes, when I'm ready, when we figured out the timing, yes, I want to marry you. The kiss he gave her then was different from all the others, slower, deeper, weighted with promise and commitment and a future they were choosing together. Eleanor surrendered to it completely, letting herself feel everything she'd spent a lifetime suppressing. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. Keep the ring. Hide it if you need to. But know it's there. Know I'm waiting for you. Eleanor tucked the ring into her pocket, feeling its weight like an anchor and a promise both. I'll keep it close. They spent the rest of the afternoon making plans for how to help Mary, carefully, strategically, in ways that wouldn't trigger Tom Rawlings' fury. Sarah would extend the invitation. Caleb would speak to Mary's mother at church, casual and friendly, making it clear the offer was about companionship, not charity. Eleanor would continue teaching Mary during school hours, but wouldn't keep her after the bell rang. It wasn't enough, but it was something. As Caleb prepared to leave, Eleanor caught his hand. "Thank you for standing with me, for not telling me I'm overreacting or being dramatic. You're neither of those things. You're brave and compassionate and exactly what Mary needs right now." He kissed her once more, quick and tender. "I'll see you Sunday, at church." After he left, Eleanor pulled the ring from her pocket and looked at it properly. The gold was worn smooth, the garnet a deep red that reminded her of winter berries. It was beautiful in its simplicity. Nothing ostentatious, nothing showy, just a quiet promise of forever. She slipped it onto her right hand where it fit perfectly, then tucked it back into her pocket. Not yet. She wasn't ready for the questions, the gossip, the inevitable scandal. But soon. That night, Eleanor wrote to Margaret. Not the defensive, apologetic letter her daughter expected, but an honest one. "I know you think I've lost my mind," she wrote. "Perhaps I have, but I've also found something I didn't know existed. The possibility of choosing my own happiness instead of living according to other people's expectations. I'm in love, Margaret. At 50 years old, I'm in love with a good man who sees me and values me and wants to build a life with me. I know this disappoints you. I know you wanted me to return to New York and be the convenient grandmother you envisioned, but I'm choosing myself. For the first time in my life, I'm choosing what I want. I hope someday you'll understand." She sealed the letter before she could second-guess the words and took it to the post office the next morning. The weekend brought Sarah to the schoolhouse with news. "My uncle says I should invite Mary to the ranch tomorrow to help me with a project. Do you think she'll come?" "I think she'd love to," Eleanor said carefully. "But you'll need to ask her yourself. Make it sound natural, like you just want the company." Sarah nodded, understanding more than Eleanor said aloud. At 12 years old, she was perceptive enough to know something was wrong with Mary, even if she didn't know the full truth. Sunday morning, Eleanor dressed for church with extra care. She wore her best dress, deep burgundy with black trim, and pinned her hair into a careful arrangement. The ring hung on a thin chain around her neck, hidden beneath her high collar, close to her heart. At church, she watched as Sarah approached Mary after the service, casual and friendly, extending the invitation. Mary's face lit up with something close to hope, and Eleanor had to look away to hide the tears burning her eyes. Caleb caught her gaze across the church steps and smiled, a private, knowing expression that made Eleanor's stomach flutter. "Mrs. Brooks?" Mrs. Pemberton appeared at her elbow. "Do you have a moment? The school board would like a word." Eleanor's pleasant mood evaporated. "Of course." She followed Mrs. Pemberton to the church basement, where the other board members were already gathered. Their expressions ranged from sympathetic to stern, and Eleanor braced herself. Reverend Walsh spoke first. "Mrs. Brooks, we've received a complaint from Tom Rawlings. He says you've been overstepping your bounds with his daughter. I've been providing extra instruction to a bright student who needs it. He says you're trying to turn Mary against her family." "Mr." Jameson's voice was skeptical but not unkind. "Is there truth to that?" Eleanor chose her words carefully. "I'm teaching Mary mathematics, literature, and critical thinking. If that's turning her against anything, it's against ignorance and limited expectations. I make no apology for wanting my students to reach their full potential." Sheriff Garrett, sitting at the back, nodded approvingly. "Be that as it may," Reverend Walsh continued, "we need you to understand that parents have rights over their children. If Mr. Rawlings doesn't want his daughter receiving extra instruction, you must respect that." "Even if it harms her education?" "Even then." Mrs. Pemberton's voice was gentle but firm. "Eleanor, we value your work. You've done more for this school in 4 months than the previous teacher did in 2 years. But we can't have parents filing complaints. It undermines your authority and creates problems for everyone." Eleanor wanted to scream. Instead, she took a deep breath and nodded. "I understand. I'll respect Mr. Rawlings' wishes regarding extra instruction." "Thank you." The Reverend looked relieved. "We knew you'd be reasonable about this." After the meeting ended, Sheriff Garrett caught up with her outside. That was well handled. You didn't promise not to help Mary, just not to give her extra instruction. Leaves room for creative solutions. I noticed you didn't mention anything about Sarah's invitation. Didn't seem relevant to the board's concerns. His smile was grim. Be careful, Eleanor. Tom Rawlings is watching you now. Don't give him ammunition. Eleanor walked back to the boarding house, her mind churning. She'd dodged the immediate threat, but the larger problem remained. Mary was still in danger, and Eleanor's hands were increasingly tied. That afternoon, Caleb stopped by with Sarah and Mary in tow. The girls ran upstairs giggling, while Caleb lingered in the parlor with Eleanor and Ida. How did the board meeting go? He asked. About as well as expected. They told me to back off. Eleanor glanced toward the stairs, making sure the girls were out of earshot. But they didn't say anything about Sarah befriending Mary. That's still safe. Good. Caleb's jaw was tight. I don't like this, Eleanor. I don't like Rawlings using the law to protect himself while hurting that child. None of us like it, but we work with what we have. Ida set down her knitting. The important thing is Mary has people watching out for her now. That matters. The girls came back down an hour later, Mary looking happier than Eleanor had seen her in weeks. Her broken arm was still in its splint, but her eyes were bright, and her smile was genuine. Thank you, Mrs. Brooks, Mary said shyly. Sarah says I can come to the ranch next weekend too, if my pa says it's all right. I hope he does, dear. You girls have fun together. After they left, Eleanor stood at the window watching them go, Sarah chattering excitedly, Mary listening with that quiet intensity, Caleb walking between them like a guardian. This, Eleanor thought, this is what family looks like when it's chosen instead of obligated. The next week brought the first real hint of spring. The snow began melting, turning streets to mud and revealing the brown earth beneath. Icicles dripped from roofs. The air lost some of its bitter edge. Eleanor felt the season change echoed in her own life. Something was shifting, warming, becoming possible. On Friday evening, Caleb appeared at the boarding house with a question. Walk with me? They walked through the muddy streets as twilight fell, talking about nothing important, the weather, the school, ranch business. But Eleanor could feel tension in Caleb's frame, like he was working up to something. Finally, near the edge of town where houses gave way to open prairie, he stopped and turned to face her. I've been thinking, he said, about us, about the future, and I don't want to wait anymore. Eleanor's heart started pounding. What are you saying? I'm saying I love you. I'm saying I want to marry you. Not someday, not eventually, soon, this spring. He took her hands in his. I know it's fast, I know people will talk, but Eleanor, we're not getting any younger, and I don't want to waste time pretending we need to take things slow when we both know what we want. Caleb, marry me, properly, publicly, in front of everyone. Move to the ranch. Keep teaching if you want. Sarah and I will make it work. Or don't teach. If you'd rather focus on the ranch. I don't care about the details. I just care about building a life with you. Eleanor felt tears start to slip down her cheeks. My children will never forgive me. Are you living for them or for yourself? It was the same question he'd asked before, but this time Eleanor felt the full weight of it. Was she going to let Margaret's disapproval and Robert's concerns dictate her choices? Was she going to choose duty over desire one more time? Or was she finally going to choose herself? I'm living for myself, she said firmly. And for you, for us. Is that a yes? Yes. Eleanor laughed through her tears. Yes, Caleb Turner, I'll marry you. This spring, publicly, in front of everyone who wants to gossip about it. I'll marry you. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her right there on the edge of town, where anyone could see, and Eleanor didn't care. Let them see. Let them talk. She was 50 years old and in love and choosing happiness for the first time in her life. When they finally broke apart, Caleb pulled the ring from his pocket. She'd given it back to him temporarily, afraid she'd lose it. Will you wear it now, properly? Eleanor held out her left hand and he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, the garnet catching the last rays of sunset. It's beautiful, she whispered. You're beautiful. Caleb kissed her again, slower this time. I love you, Eleanor Brooks. Soon to be Eleanor Turner. The name sent a thrill through her. Eleanor Turner, a new name for a new life, a new beginning at 50 years old. They walked back to town hand in hand, and Eleanor knew that by tomorrow morning, everyone in Dry Creek would know, the school teacher and the rancher, the widow and the widower, the scandal waiting to happen. She couldn't wait. Ida saw the ring the moment Eleanor walked through the door. "Oh, thank heavens. I thought you two would dance around each other forever. We're getting married this spring." "Good. About time." Ida pulled Eleanor into a fierce hug. "I'm happy for you. You deserve this." That night, Eleanor lay in bed and stared at the ring on her finger, watching how it caught the moonlight. Tomorrow would bring questions and gossip and probably some disapproval. The school board might have concerns. Parents might whisper. Her children would definitely have opinions. But tonight, she was just a woman in love, wearing a ring that promised forever, and choosing happiness over every other consideration. She thought about the Eleanor who'd stepped off the train in Dry Creek 6 months ago, frightened, uncertain, running from a life that had suffocated her. That woman had been looking for escape, for breathing room, for anything other than slow invisibility. This Eleanor, the one lying in bed with a ring on her finger and joy in her heart, had found so much more. She'd found purpose in teaching. She'd found strength in independence. She'd found love when she'd stopped looking for it. At 50 years old, Eleanor Brooks had finally learned what it meant to be alive. The next morning, Eleanor wore the ring to church. She and Caleb sat in his usual pew with Sarah between them, and Eleanor felt the stairs like a physical weight. By the time Reverend Walsh began his sermon, the news had spread through the congregation like wildfire. After the service, people approached with reactions ranging from genuine happiness to barely concealed shock. Mrs. Pemberton hugged Eleanor warmly. Miss Thornton offered congratulations. Mrs. Chen smiled knowingly and said she'd seen this coming months ago. But there were others who looked at Eleanor's ring with pursed lips and disapproving eyes. She heard the whispers. Too fast, inappropriate, unseemly for a woman her age. Eleanor held her head high and ignored them all. It was Tom Rawlings who finally confronted them directly. He approached as they were leaving, his face flushed with anger and something that looked like alcohol. "So it's true," he said, his voice carrying across the church steps. "The school teacher's getting married, to a man nearly 10 years younger. Guess teaching wasn't enough excitement for you." Caleb moved in front of Eleanor immediately. "Watch your mouth, Rawlings." "Or what? You'll defend her honor?" Rawlings laughed, ugly and mean. "Everyone knows what kind of woman chases after younger men. Probably been carrying on for months, and now you're just making it legal." The crowd went silent. Eleanor felt fury rise in her throat, but before she could respond, Sarah spoke up. "That's not true." The girl's voice was clear and fierce. "Mrs. Brooks is the best person I know, and my uncle loves her. You're just mean and—" "Sarah," Caleb warned gently, but his eyes were on Rawlings, and they were dangerous. "You need to leave. Now." "I'll leave when I'm ready, and I'll tell you something else. My Mary won't be going to your ranch anymore. I won't have her exposed to this kind of immorality." Eleanor's heart sank. This was what she'd feared, that her relationship with Caleb would cost Mary the one safe place she had. But before she could speak, Mary herself stepped forward from where she'd been standing with her mother. "Pa, please, I like going to the ranch. Sarah's my friend." "You'll do as you're told." Rawlings grabbed Mary's good arm roughly, and she flinched. The crowd saw it. Everyone saw it. "Let her go." Sheriff Garrett's voice cut through the tension. He'd appeared at Rawlings' elbow, his expression hard. "You're making a scene, Tom. Time to go home." "I'm not—" "You are. Now." The sheriff's hand moved to his gun belt, not threatening, just reminding. "Go home and sleep it off. We'll talk tomorrow when you're sober." Rawlings glared at Eleanor one more time, then stormed off, dragging Mary with him. Her mother followed, head down, and Eleanor felt sick watching them go. The crowd dispersed slowly, people heading home with plenty to gossip about. Eleanor stood on the church steps, feeling like she'd just survived a battle she hadn't expected to fight. Caleb's arm came around her shoulders. "You all right?" "No." "Mary, did you see how he grabbed her? In front of everyone?" "I saw." So did the sheriff. He kissed the top of her head. It's not nothing, Eleanor. People witnessed it. That matters. It won't be enough to protect her. Maybe not, but it's something. He turned her to face him. Eleanor, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that loving me makes your life more complicated. If you want to wait to announce the engagement, no. Eleanor's voice was firm. No, I'm not hiding what we have. Not for Rawlings, not for gossip, not for anyone. We love each other. We're getting married. And if people don't like it, that's their problem. Sarah hugged Eleanor fiercely. I'm glad you're marrying Uncle Caleb. You make him happy, and me too. Eleanor felt her throat tighten. You make me happy too, sweetheart. Both of you. They went to the ranch for Sunday dinner, and despite the ugliness of the morning, Eleanor felt herself relax into the warmth of this makeshift family. Sarah chattered about wedding plans, what Eleanor would wear, whether they'd have a party, where Eleanor would sleep in the ranch house. Actually, Caleb said carefully, over coffee, I wanted to talk to you both about that. Eleanor, if you're comfortable with it, I'd like us to share a room after we're married. But I want you to be part of deciding how we arrange things. This will be your home, too. The casualness with which he discussed sharing a bed made Eleanor's cheeks warm. They hadn't talked about the physical aspects of marriage, not directly, but the implication hung in the air now, impossible to ignore. Sarah, blessedly oblivious to the undercurrent, just nodded. That makes sense. Married people share rooms. I can help fix it up to look nice. After Sarah wandered off to do chores, Eleanor and Caleb sat at the kitchen table, hands clasped across the scarred wood. I should probably tell you, Eleanor said quietly. I'm nervous. About the wedding night. About all of it. Eleanor, we don't have to. I want to, she interrupted. I want all of it. But I've only ever been with William, and that was dutiful, functional. I don't know how to be with someone I actually want. Someone who makes me feel things I didn't know I could feel. Caleb brought her hand to his lips. Then we'll figure it out together. There's no rush, no expectations. We'll take our time and discover what makes us both happy. That's what marriage should be. The tenderness in his voice made Eleanor's eyes sting. How are you real? How did I get this lucky? We both got lucky. We both got a second chance. He pulled her to her feet and into his arms. I love you. Everything else we'll figure out as we go. Eleanor rested her head against his chest and let herself believe it. They would figure it out. Together. One day at a time. The ride back to town that evening was quiet, Eleanor's mind full of thoughts about weddings and futures and the life she was choosing. When Caleb pulled the buggy up in front of the boarding house, he helped her down but kept her hand in his. When do you want to get married? He asked. What timing feels right to you? Eleanor thought about it. Soon. Before I lose my nerve, before my children have time to travel here and try to talk me out of it. Maybe a month from now? A month? Caleb smiled. I can live with that. Gives us time to prepare, but not so long we're waiting forever. Will that work for the ranch? Can you be away long enough for a wedding trip? We'll figure it out. Maybe just a few days in Cheyenne, somewhere with a real hotel and restaurants, then back home to start our life. He cupped her face in his hands. Eleanor Turner. Has a nice ring to it. It does, she agreed, though I'll have to get used to it. He kissed her goodnight on the boarding house steps, slow and sweet and full of promise. Eleanor walked inside feeling like she was floating. Ida was waiting with tea and questions. So, when's the wedding? A month from now, early April. Good. That gives us time to plan properly. Ida's eyes were bright. Eleanor, I'm so happy for you. You found something real, something worth having. That night, Eleanor wrote another letter to Margaret, shorter this time, more direct. I'm getting married in April to a rancher named Caleb Turner. He's 43, kind, honest, and loves me deeply. I love him the same way. I know this isn't what you wanted for me, but it's what I want for myself. I hope you can find it in your heart to be happy for me, even if you don't understand. She sealed it and set it on her bureau. Tomorrow she'd mail it. Tomorrow she'd start preparing for a wedding. Tomorrow she'd begin the next chapter of a life she'd chosen for herself. But tonight, she simply sat at her window and looked out at Dry Creek, this rough frontier town that had become home. She thought about the woman who'd arrived here 6 months ago, broken and seeking escape. That woman was gone, replaced by someone stronger, braver, more fully alive. Eleanor Brooks was getting married. At 50 years old, she was choosing love over propriety, passion over duty, happiness over everyone else's expectations. And she'd never been more certain of anything in her life. The month before the wedding passed in a blur of preparation and unexpected complications. Eleanor continued teaching, though she could feel the scrutiny of parents who'd heard about her engagement. Some were supportive, bringing small gifts and offering congratulations. Others watched her with pursed lips and whispered when they thought she couldn't hear. She ignored them all and focused on what mattered: her students, her upcoming marriage, and the nagging worry about Mary Rawlings that refused to leave her alone. True to his threat, Tom Rawlings had forbidden Mary from visiting the ranch. The girl came to school with her eyes downcast and her spirit dimmed, and it broke Eleanor's heart to see it. During lessons, Eleanor caught Mary staring out the window with an expression that looked like longing mixed with hopelessness. On a Tuesday afternoon, 2 weeks before the wedding, everything changed. Eleanor was teaching a geography lesson when the schoolhouse door burst open. Mary's mother stood in the doorway, her face bruised and her dress torn, supporting Mary, who was bleeding from a cut above her eye. "Please," Mrs. Rawlings gasped. "He's gone too far this time. Please help us." Eleanor moved immediately, settling them both in chairs while sending Johnny Mason running for the doctor and the sheriff. The other students stared in shocked silence until Eleanor gently dismissed them early, asking the older ones to escort the younger children home safely. When the room was empty except for Mary, her mother, and Eleanor, the truth finally came pouring out. "He was drunk," Mrs. Rawlings said, her voice shaking. "More drunk than usual." Mary talked back, just told him she wanted to go to school, nothing disrespectful, and he hit her, knocked her into the table. When I tried to stop him, he turned on me too. She looked up at Eleanor with eyes full of shame and desperation. "I can't go back there. I can't take Mary back there. He'll kill us both eventually." "You won't go back," Eleanor said firmly. "I promise you, you're both safe now." Dr. Morrison arrived first, his expression grim as he examined Mary's head wound and her mother's injuries. "The girl's got a concussion, might have a cracked rib too, and Mrs. Rawlings here needs stitches." He looked at Eleanor. "Where can they stay? They can't go home." "They'll stay at the boarding house. Ida will make room." Sheriff Garrett appeared moments later, and this time when Mrs. Rawlings told her story, with Mary nodding confirmation through tears, he had what he needed: witnesses, testimony, evidence that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. "I'll go arrest Tom now," he said. "But you need to understand, he'll be out in a day or two unless you're willing to testify in front of a judge." Mrs. Rawlings gripped Mary's hand. "I'll testify. I should have done it years ago. I'm done protecting him." After the sheriff left, Eleanor helped them to the boarding house. Ida took one look at the bruised, frightened woman and child and immediately set about making them comfortable, clucking over them like a protective hen. That evening, Eleanor sent word to Caleb about what had happened. He arrived within the hour, bringing Sarah with him. "How can we help?" he asked without preamble. "They need somewhere more permanent than the boarding house, somewhere Tom Rawlings can't find them if he makes bail." Caleb didn't hesitate. "They can stay at the ranch. We've got room, and I've got hands who'll make sure Rawlings doesn't get anywhere near the place." Mrs. Rawlings, sitting at Ida's kitchen table with a cup of tea she wasn't drinking, looked up with tears in her eyes. "Why would you do that for us? You don't even know us." "Because it's the right thing to do," Caleb said simply. "And because Eleanor cares about your daughter, which means I care too." Sarah sat beside Mary and took her hand. "You can share my room. It'll be like having a sister." The relief on Mary's face was heartbreaking. "Really? I can stay with you?" "As long as you need," Caleb confirmed. "Both of you." Later that night, after the Rawlings women had been settled in rooms at the boarding house for the night and Caleb had returned to the ranch, Eleanor sat with Ida in the parlor, too wrung out to sleep. "Today was a good day," Ida said quietly. "Terrible but good. That girl's finally safe." "For now. But what happens when Tom Rawlings gets out of jail? What happens at the trial?" "You can't control everything, Eleanor. You did what you could. You gave them a safe place to land. That's enough." Was it enough? Eleanor didn't know. But as she climbed the stairs to her room, she felt the weight of responsibility settling heavier on her shoulders. She'd helped Mary and her mother escape immediate danger, but the battle wasn't over. Not yet. The next morning brought news that Tom Rawlings had been arrested without incident and was being held pending a hearing. It also brought a letter from Margaret. Eleanor opened it with trembling hands, already bracing herself for disappointment. The letter was exactly what she'd expected, full of shock, disapproval, and thinly veiled accusations that Eleanor was making a terrible mistake. Margaret couldn't understand how her mother could throw away propriety for a man she'd known less than a year. Couldn't understand how Eleanor could embarrass the family this way. At the end, Margaret had written, "If you go through with this wedding, Mother, don't expect us to attend or support it. You're choosing this man over your own children. I hope you can live with that choice." Eleanor read the letter twice, then carefully folded it and set it aside. The words hurt. Of course they did, but underneath the hurt was something else. Clarity. She'd spent 30 years living for her children, being the mother they needed, sacrificing her own wants for their comfort. And now, when she finally chose something for herself, they called it betrayal. Well, she was done apologizing for wanting to be happy. She pulled out her writing paper and composed a response. Brief, firm, loving, but uncompromising. Margaret, I'm sorry you can't support my decision, but I'm marrying Caleb whether you attend or not. I love him, and he loves me, and at 50 years old, I finally understand what it means to choose joy over duty. If that makes me selfish in your eyes, I'll have to live with that, but I won't live without him. I hope someday you'll understand. Until then, know that I love you, but I love myself too. And that's not something I'm willing to give up anymore. She sealed it and took it to the post office before she could second-guess herself. The days before the wedding accelerated. Eleanor and Ida worked on altering a dress, simple cream-colored silk that Ida had worn to her own wedding 40 years ago. Sarah helped Eleanor practice pinning her hair in different styles, giggling over which one looked most romantic. Mrs. Chen donated lace for the veil and seemed genuinely delighted to be part of the preparations. Mary and her mother moved to the ranch, and Eleanor watched as the girl slowly started to bloom under the safety and attention. The cut above her eye healed to a thin scar, her concussion resolved. More importantly, the fear in her eyes began to fade, replaced by something that looked like hope. Tom Rawlings remained in jail, his hearing postponed twice as the circuit judge dealt with cases in other towns. Sheriff Garrett warned that he'd eventually make bail, but for now, the Rawlings women were safe. 5 days before the wedding, Caleb took Eleanor to see the ranch house bedroom that would be theirs after they married. He'd cleaned it thoroughly, made space in the wardrobe for her clothes, even hung new curtains that Sarah had sewn. "I want you to feel at home here," he said, watching her nervously. "If you want to change anything, just say so." Eleanor walked slowly around the room, touching the furniture, looking out the window at the endless Wyoming sky. This would be her bedroom, her home, the place where she'd wake up beside Caleb every morning. "It's perfect," she said softly. "Absolutely perfect." Caleb came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "Nervous? Terrified? About the wedding? About marrying me?" "About the wedding night," Eleanor admitted, her cheeks warming. "About not knowing how to be a wife to someone I actually desire. William and I, it was different, mechanical. I don't know how to be anything else." Caleb turned her to face him, his expression tender. "Eleanor, we don't have to do anything you're not ready for. There's no timeline, no expectations. We'll figure it out together, at whatever pace feels right. But you're a man, and I want you to be happy and comfortable. That's all I want." He kissed her forehead. "Yes, I desire you. Yes, I look forward to that part of marriage. But not if it makes you anxious or afraid. We have time, Eleanor. All the time in the world." She rested her forehead against his chest, breathing in the scent of him, leather and soap, and something uniquely Caleb. "I want it too. I want all of it. I'm just scared of disappointing you." "You couldn't possibly disappoint me." His arms tightened around her. "Eleanor, I've waited 10 years for someone who makes me feel the way you do. A few more days or weeks while we figure things out together isn't going to change that." They stood like that for a long moment, and Eleanor felt some of her anxiety ease. He was right. They had time. This wasn't a race. 2 days before the wedding, the circuit judge finally arrived in Dry Creek for Tom Rawlings' hearing. Eleanor attended with Caleb, sitting in the back of the courtroom while Mrs. Rawlings testified about years of abuse, the beatings, the threats, the terror she'd lived with. Mary testified too, her voice small but steady, describing what her father had done. The bruises he'd left, the broken arm, the fear that had governed her entire childhood. Tom Rawlings sat at the defendant's table, his face red with rage, occasionally shouting objections that the judge silenced with sharp reprimands. When it was over, the judge ruled that Tom Rawlings would stand trial for assault and battery. In the meantime, he granted a restraining order keeping Rawlings away from his wife and daughter. Outside the courthouse, Mrs. Rawlings collapsed into Eleanor's arms, sobbing with relief. "It's over. It's finally over." "You were so brave," Eleanor murmured. "Both of you were incredibly brave." Mary stood beside them, holding Sarah's hand, and for the first time since Eleanor had known her, the girl was smiling. Really smiling. That evening, Eleanor stood in her room at the boarding house, looking at her wedding dress hanging on the wardrobe door. Tomorrow night, she'd sleep here for the last time. The next night, she'd be at the ranch. Mrs. Caleb Turner, starting a new life at 50 years old. Ida appeared in the doorway. "Having second thoughts?" "No, just first thoughts about everything that's about to change." "Change is good. You've earned this, Eleanor." Ida came into the room and sat on the bed. "I've known you 6 months, and in that time I've watched you transform from a frightened widow, running from her old life, into a woman who knows exactly what she wants. That's not nothing. I couldn't have done it without you, without this place, without everyone who gave me a chance. We gave you a place to land. You did the rest yourself." Ida patted her hand. "Now get some sleep. You've got a wedding tomorrow, and you want to look fresh for that handsome rancher of yours." Eleanor tried to sleep, but her mind wouldn't settle. She kept thinking about the ceremony tomorrow, about the life waiting for her, about the vows she'd make and mean with every fiber of her being. Finally, she got up and went to the window, looking out at the dark street below. Somewhere out there, Caleb was probably lying awake too, thinking similar thoughts. Tomorrow, they'd stand before this entire town and choose each other publicly, permanently, irrevocably. Tomorrow, Eleanor Brooks would become Eleanor Turner. Tomorrow, her new life would truly begin. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the April sun warm enough to melt the last lingering patches of snow. Eleanor woke early, her stomach fluttering with nerves and anticipation. Ida and Mrs. Chen helped her dress, lacing the silk gown and arranging the lace veil. Sarah arrived with wildflowers for a bouquet, the first brave blooms of spring, yellow and purple and white. "You look beautiful," Sarah breathed. "Uncle Caleb's going to cry when he sees you." Eleanor laughed, though her own eyes were suspiciously damp. "I hope not. We can't both be crying during the vows." The ceremony was set for 2 o'clock at the church. Eleanor arrived with Ida, and the building was already packed, more people than she'd expected, filling every pew. Friends she'd made, parents of her students, ranch hands from the Triple T, townspeople who'd watched her journey from frightened newcomer to confident woman. Even the school board was there, Mrs. Pemberton smiling encouragingly from the front row. And then Eleanor saw Caleb standing at the altar with Reverend Walsh, and everything else faded away. He wore his best suit, his hair neatly combed, his beard trimmed. But it was his expression that made Eleanor's breath catch. Pure, undisguised joy mixed with something that looked like awe. Ida walked her down the aisle, and Eleanor kept her eyes on Caleb the whole way. When she reached him, he took her hands in his, and she felt the slight tremor in his fingers. "You're shaking," she whispered. "So are you," he murmured back, smiling. Reverend Walsh cleared his throat and began the ceremony. Eleanor barely heard the traditional words, love, honor, cherish, till death do us part. She was too focused on Caleb's face, on the way he looked at her like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking for 10 years. When it came time for vows, Caleb spoke clearly, his voice carrying through the church. "I, Caleb Turner, take you, Eleanor Brooks, to be my wife. I promise to love you fiercely, support you always, and never take for granted the gift of your presence in my life. You've made me believe in second chances, and I'll spend the rest of my days proving myself worthy of yours. Eleanor's voice shook when she spoke her own vows. I, Eleanor Brooks, take you, Caleb Turner, to be my husband. I promise to choose you every day, to build a life with you that honors both our pasts and embraces our future. You've shown me what it means to be truly seen and truly loved, and I'll carry that gift with gratitude for the rest of my life. The Reverend smiled. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Caleb, you may kiss your bride. Caleb's hands came up to cradle Eleanor's face, gentle and reverent. Hello, Mrs. Turner, he whispered. Hello, Mr. Turner. And then he kissed her, slowly, deeply, thoroughly, while the congregation erupted in applause and whistles. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and grinning, Eleanor saw Sarah in the front row crying happy tears, Ida beaming with satisfaction, and Mary Rawlings clapping with pure joy. The reception was held in the church basement, a simple affair with cake and punch and dancing. Eleanor found herself swept from one conversation to another, accepting congratulations and well wishes until her face hurt from smiling. At one point, she found herself face to face with Mr. Jameson from the school board. Mrs. Turner, he said formally, I hope you'll continue teaching, at least until the end of the school year. The children would be devastated to lose you. I plan to finish the year, Eleanor confirmed. After that, Caleb and I will decide together what makes the most sense. Fair enough. He paused, then added more warmly, You've been good for this town, Eleanor. I wasn't sure about you when you first arrived. Thought maybe you were just a city woman playing at frontier life. I'm glad to have been proven wrong. It was perhaps the kindest thing he'd ever said to her. As the afternoon stretched into evening, Caleb pulled Eleanor aside. Ready to go home, Mrs. Turner? Home. The ranch. Their life together. Yes, Eleanor said. I'm ready. They said their goodbyes, climbed into Caleb's wagon, now decorated with ribbons and trailing tin cans, courtesy of ranch hands with too much time, and headed west out of town as the sun began to set. Sarah had stayed in town with Ida for the night, giving them privacy. Mary and her mother were staying with friends. For the first time, Eleanor and Caleb would be truly alone in their home. The ride was quiet, both of them wrapped in their own thoughts. Eleanor's nervousness had returned, not about marrying Caleb, but about what came next. The wedding night. The physical intimacy she'd promised but didn't know how to navigate. At the ranch, Caleb helped her down from the wagon and carried her across the threshold of the ranch house, a tradition that made Eleanor laugh despite her nerves. Welcome home, he said softly, setting her on her feet in the front hall. Eleanor looked around at what was now her home. The sturdy furniture, the books on shelves, the warmth of a fire already burning in the hearth. Everything familiar from her visits, but different now, because she belonged here. Are you hungry? Caleb asked. I could make coffee, or we could just sit and talk. Whatever you want, Eleanor. There's no rush for anything. His consideration, his awareness of her nervousness, made Eleanor's heart swell. She reached up and touched his face, feeling the roughness of his beard against her palm. Caleb, I need you to know something. I want this, all of it. I want to be your wife in every sense of the word. I'm just nervous because I don't know how to do this right. There's no right or wrong. There's just us, figuring it out together. He turned his head to kiss her palm. But we don't have to do anything tonight. We have the rest of our lives. I don't want to wait. Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she forced herself to be honest. I've been waiting my whole life to feel the way I feel with you. I don't want to waste another night. Something darkened in Caleb's eyes, desire mixed with tenderness. Are you sure? I'm sure. He took her hand and led her upstairs to their bedroom. The room glowed with lamplight, warm and intimate. Someone, probably Sarah, had left wildflowers on the bureau and turned down the bed. Caleb turned to face Eleanor, his expression serious. If at any point you want to stop, just say so. I mean it, Eleanor. Your comfort matters more to me than anything else. Eleanor nodded, her heart pounding. Caleb reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and began removing the pins from her hair. It fell in waves around her shoulders, and he ran his fingers through it with reverence. I've wanted to do this since the day I met you, he murmured. You always keep it pinned up so tight. I wanted to see it down. It's going gray, Eleanor said self-consciously. It's beautiful. You're beautiful. He kissed her then, slow and deep, and Eleanor felt herself relax into him. They undressed each other carefully, reverently, with none of the efficient practicality of Eleanor's previous experience. Caleb took his time, kissing each new bit of skin revealed, murmuring words of love and desire that made Eleanor's entire body flush with heat. When they finally lay together in the marriage bed, skin against skin, Eleanor expected to feel awkward or embarrassed. Instead, she felt safe, cherished, desired in a way she'd never experienced before. Caleb was patient and attentive, watching her face for any sign of discomfort, asking what felt good and what didn't. And Eleanor, for the first time in her life, allowed herself to be fully present in her own body, to feel pleasure without shame, to want without apology, to give and receive love without the weight of duty. Afterward, they lay tangled together, both breathless and stunned by the intensity of what they'd shared. That was, Eleanor started, then stopped, unable to find words. Yeah, Caleb agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. It was. I didn't know it could be like that. In 30 years of marriage, I never... She broke off, feeling disloyal to William's memory. Then, we're both lucky, Caleb said simply. We both get to discover it together, and we've got years to keep discovering. Eleanor curled into his warmth, feeling utterly content in a way she'd never experienced before. I love you, Caleb Turner. I love you, Eleanor Turner. He pulled the blankets over them both. Now sleep. We've got a whole life ahead of us, and I want you well rested for it. Eleanor drifted off in her husband's arms, in her own home, at the beginning of a life she'd chosen for herself. At 50 years old, she'd finally learned what it meant to be truly, completely, joyfully alive. The next morning, Eleanor woke to sunlight streaming through the bedroom window, and Caleb already awake beside her, watching her with a soft smile. Good morning, Mrs. Turner. Good morning, Mr. Turner. Eleanor stretched, feeling pleasantly sore in places that reminded her of the night before. What time is it? Early still, but the ranch doesn't sleep in, even for newlyweds. He kissed her forehead. Though we could stay in bed a while longer if you want. What about the cattle? The hands can manage without me for one morning. He pulled her closer. I'd rather stay here with my wife. They spent the morning in lazy contentment, talking about everything and nothing, learning the rhythms of being married to each other. Eventually, they dressed and went downstairs, where Caleb made coffee and Eleanor discovered she had no idea where anything was in her own kitchen. I'll learn, she said, laughing at herself as she opened the wrong cabinet for the third time. We'll learn together. I'm not exactly a domestic expert myself. Caleb set coffee and bread on the table. Sarah usually handles most of the cooking. We'll have to figure out a new arrangement now that you're here. They were still figuring out breakfast when they heard a wagon approaching. Through the window, Eleanor saw Sarah and Ida arriving, with Mary and her mother following in a second wagon. So much for privacy, Caleb muttered, but he was smiling. The ranch house filled with laughter and conversation as Sarah demanded details about the wedding, and Mary shyly presented Eleanor with a drawing she'd made, a picture of Eleanor and Caleb standing under an arch of flowers. It's beautiful, Mary. Thank you. Eleanor hung it on the wall immediately, making the girl beam with pride. Over the next weeks, Eleanor settled into ranch life with surprising ease. She finished the school year teaching her students until the last day of May, then transitioned to spending more time at home. She learned to cook for ranch hands, to manage household accounts, to read weather signs and plan accordingly. Mary and her mother stayed on at the ranch, Mrs. Rawlings helping with housework, and Mary blossoming under the attention and safety. Tom Rawlings was eventually tried and sentenced to 2 years in prison for assault. When he was released, he'd be forbidden from coming within 100 yards of his former family. The women didn't waste time grieving what they'd lost. Instead, they built new lives. Mrs. Rawlings eventually taking a job at the general store, Mary excelling in school and dreaming of becoming a teacher herself one day. Eleanor's children never came to Wyoming. Margaret sent a brief, cold letter acknowledging the marriage but making it clear she didn't approve. Robert sent money, as if Eleanor needed charity, which she returned with a note explaining she was perfectly well provided for. It hurt. Of course it hurt. But Eleanor had chosen her own happiness over their approval, and she didn't regret it. One evening in late summer, Eleanor and Caleb sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Sarah and Mary were inside, ostensibly doing homework but probably gossiping about boys. Ranch hands were finishing evening chores. The air smelled of hay and horses and the particular sweetness of Wyoming summer. Caleb reached for Eleanor's hand. "Any regrets?" "Not a single one." Eleanor laced her fingers through his. "Though I never imagined my life would look like this. Married to a rancher, living in Wyoming territory, raising children who aren't mine by blood but somehow feel like mine anyway. Life has a way of surprising us." He pulled her closer and she rested her head on his shoulder. "I thought I'd spend the rest of my life alone. Never expected a stubborn schoolteacher from New York to show up and turn everything upside down." "I wasn't stubborn. I was determined. You were both." He kissed the top of her head. "And I love you for it." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and stars began appearing in the vast Wyoming sky. Eleanor thought about the woman who'd stepped off the train nearly a year ago, frightened, uncertain, running from a life that had suffocated her. That woman wouldn't recognize the Eleanor who sat here now, confident, loved, living a life she'd chosen on her own terms. "Caleb?" Eleanor said quietly. "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me. For choosing me. For showing me what it means to be loved without conditions or expectations." She sat up to look at him properly. "For giving me a second chance at happiness when I thought it was too late." Caleb cupped her face in his hands, his expression tender in the starlight. "Eleanor Turner, loving you is the easiest thing I've ever done, and every day for the rest of my life, I'm going to make sure you know it." He kissed her then, slow and deep and full of promise, and Eleanor surrendered to it completely. At 50 years old, she'd finally learned what she'd been searching for her entire life, that it's never too late to choose yourself, to choose love, to choose a life that makes you feel alive. Her first kiss with Caleb that snowy night months ago had surprised her, catching her off guard with its tenderness and possibility. But the love that followed, the daily choosing, the building of a life together, the courage to keep reaching for happiness despite fear and doubt, that wasn't about youth or timing or propriety. It was about two people who'd lived long enough to know what mattered, brave enough to reach for it, and wise enough to hold it close once they found it. Eleanor Brooks had come to Wyoming looking for escape. Eleanor Turner had found home. And in between, she'd discovered the most important truth of all. It's never too late to write your own ending. Years later, when people asked how their love began, Eleanor would smile and remember that moment in the ranch house at Christmas, when Caleb had leaned in and kissed her for the first time. That kiss had been gentle but sudden, catching her unprepared for the way her heart would respond. But it was the kiss that followed, slower, more deliberate, given with full intention, that had changed everything. That was the kiss that promised forever. The kiss that said, "I choose you, fully, completely, without reservation." Caleb would pull her close then, even in front of whoever was asking, and press another slow, deliberate kiss to her lips. Never hurried, never assumed, always chosen. And Eleanor would remember, with a gratitude that never faded, that at 50 years old she'd finally learned what she'd been missing her entire life. Not the polite affection of duty, not the quiet endurance of obligation, but a love freely offered and freely chosen. A love that saw her clearly and wanted her anyway. A love that proved, beyond any doubt, that the best stories don't always happen to the young. Sometimes they happen to those brave enough to start over, to choose joy over security, to risk everything for the chance at something real. Eleanor had taken that risk, and in return, she'd found everything she never knew she needed. As she sat on the porch of the Triple T Ranch, her husband's arm around her shoulders, and the vast Wyoming sky spreading stars overhead like scattered diamonds, Eleanor Brooks Turner smiled and thought, This is what happiness feels like. And it had been worth every frightening, exhilarating, perfectly imperfect moment it took to get here.